In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Alexander the Great set off from Greece to conquer the rich land of his Persian foe. His campaign would take him thousands of kilometers from his homeland across Afghanistan in Central Asia. I want to find out what the world looked like to Alexander. But this landscape today is radically different to the way it appeared in the time of the ancient Greeks. And I believe the reason is extreme climate change. So this place was an inland waterway, and the Greeks, according to this theory, could have sailed right past here. Today, remnants of the age when water connected these lands still survive. There's a glimmer of the extraordinary Oxus civilization that once thrived in these arid and barren lands. Great cities and trade routes first recorded by explorers that sailed on ancient seas. I'm starting my journey as Alexander the Great did, in Greece. This is Volos harbour, around 4 hours' drive from the modern capital today, Athens. Now, if the crow flies, it's about 4,000 kilometres to Afghanistan. Now, in the time of Alexander the Great, that was the end of the world. But what's amazing about Alexander is that he wasn't the first to travel to the east. The Greeks have been drawn to the east since the earliest of times. I want to see what connections there are to Alexander and who may have inspired him. So the ancient Greeks were a pretty intrepid bunch. The trouble is, all those legends that surround their great voyages means that it's really hard to work out what actually happened. But behind some of them, there's an element of truth. And the most famous of them was Jason and the Argonauts. Thanks to the government of Volos, we've been given use of their replica of Jason's celebrated boat, the Argo, to explore what truth lies behind Jason's fabled voyage. When Jason and his crew of Argonauts are thought to have set sail over 3,000 years ago, ships like this plied the Aegean Sea. Jason and the Argonauts is an ancient Greek myth, a tale passed down for millennia. The hero, Prince Jason, and his crew of Argonauts sailed across distant seas in search of the magical Golden Fleece. The fleece was a symbol of prosperity for his family and his kingdom. Well, I guess by now you're wondering what Jason and the Argonauts has to do with Alexander the Great in Afghanistan. And if you accept the popularised version of the story, well, nothing at all. But there are far more ancient fragments that tell a very different journey for Jason. Now, if I'm right, this will shed some amazing light on where the legend came from and, perhaps more importantly, where they went. And that's got everything to do with my quest for Alexander's lost world. I think the origins of the Jason myth are based on real facts. I want to find out how the story of Jason and his Argonauts began. Our modern-day Jason, and captain of this Argo, is Babylos Stavros. Over the years, he and the Argonauts Rowing Club have sailed from one side of the Aegean Sea to the other. If you're going to explore the legend of Jason and the Argonauts, this is the crew to do it with. This Argo is a 50-oared war galley, what's known as a pentaconta. Crafted by hand using Bronze Age tools and techniques, there's not a nail to be found anywhere along its 28-metre-long hull. In ancient times, versatile craft like this were used for long-range sea trade. The popular version of the Jason myth says that in 1263 BC, they set sail from Mycenae in Bronze Age Greece into the Aegean Sea. They crossed the Sea of Marmara and passed through the Bosphorus into the Black Sea, where they turned eastwards onto the land of the Golden Fleece, thought today to be in the Republic of Georgia. But this can't be right. There's no evidence that the Mycenaean Greeks ever sailed to Georgia. What's more, Georgia wasn't a major centre of gold production. That makes the idea of Georgia as the land of the Golden Fleece hard for me to believe.
Hey up! Hey up! Hey up!
The oldest Greek versions of the story tell of a different route. And they hold a clue. The legendary Argonauts were heading far further than Georgia, to the remote east. What they say is that they sailed out of the Black Sea into the ocean and then came around Africa back into the Mediterranean. What these guys are talking about is a journey out of the Black Sea, not to the Black Sea. Now, if you look at a map of the Black Sea today, there's only two ways out of it. One is the Danube, the other is the River Don. Now, both of those don't lead to any sea. So, was it back then somehow different? Was there a way that you could sail out of the Black Sea? Well, that's what we're going to find out. One of the oldest versions of the story comes from the ancient Greek writer Homer. His epic poems suggest that thousands of years ago, the world looked very different to the way it looks today. Water levels were so much higher, the seas, lakes and rivers of the Earth would be unrecognisable to us now. At the end of the last ice age, around 14,000 years ago, climate change began to melt the vast ice sheets of the Northern Hemisphere, causing mega floods. The Caspian Sea rose more than 50 metres. That's over 160 feet. As it continued to rise, it spilled over, flooding into the Black Sea. These two seas were once connected by a massive waterway, and I believe it's the trading link described in legends as the River Oxus. So from around 12,000 BC, it was possible to sail from Greece across the Black Sea and on to the east, just as Homer described. Now, the timing of these mega floods is still hotly debated. But what's important for us is the connection between the seas likely remained open till around 6000 BC. And that is a game changer. The ancient Greek tale of Jason and his brave Argonauts could have originated thousands of years earlier than we think, with the first people to sail across this ancient waterway. We're pulling into shore because there's a very special place I want to see, a short distance out of town. This is a site that's so ancient, it's older than the Jason myth. It dates back to the very first seafarers to ever set foot here. This is Sesklo. I'm just a couple of kilometres away from where the Argos anchored. But 9,000 years ago, this was a Neolithic settlement. And why it's so special is because this is where Eastern seafarers first landed in Greece. And from here, the Neolithic revolution spread all over Europe. In the Neolithic era, a revolutionary change in human civilization was taking hold. People left the nomadic lifestyle and began to farm. Now they could rely on a stable source of food, and this in turn gave them the freedom to travel. Archaeologists refer to it as the Great Exodus. In a series of voyages between 7 and 6,000 BC, pioneering seafarers sailed westwards from the coasts of Turkey and Syria across the eastern Mediterranean all the way to Greece. What's so significant for us is the place where these seafarers settled, right here, is exactly the same place that the Jason legend begins. I believe the story of Jason and the Argonauts is far older than we've ever believed. I think it originates with those seafarers. So instead of being a Bronze Age tale told only 3,000 years ago, I'm convinced the legend of Jason and his Argonauts began with the true story of pioneering Neolithic mariners who migrated across the world when the seas were connected. And there's a remarkable record of Neolithic seafarers that survives today. This is a pictograph of a Neolithic sea vessel scored into the rocks of Gobustan, over 2,000 kilometers to the east in Azerbaijan. These are boats with keels. Some have as many as 37 oarsmen. They suggest that Neolithic seafarers had developed the technology needed for long-distance marine navigation. So they could have travelled and traded between east and west. For all this to be feasible, there must be some evidence that the waterway linking these seas, the legendary Phasis River, actually existed. Like the Neolithic mariners, I'm heading from Greece across the Black Sea to southern Russia. Water levels have dropped by as much as 75 metres. That's nearly 250 feet. But I believe that a remnant of the Phasis still survives. It's known as the Manich Waterway. It runs for over 600 kilometres, almost all the way to the Caspian, in a chain of lakes, streams and boggy wetlands. This is a conservation area, and I've jumped on board a Parks and Wildlife boat to explore. When water levels here were higher, these rivers and marshes were part of the immense Phasis waterway. What's truly remarkable is that after 8,000 years, Kazakhstan and the Russians are planning to reopen it. In a series of canals and dikes, they're going to actually connect the seas again. And once again, you'll be able to sail from the Black Sea through to the Caspian. Just like the Russians today, the ancient Greeks had the same idea. Very likely inspired by the myth of Jason, Alexander the Great believed that once an ancient connection between the seas had existed. And in 282 BC, a Macedonian general named Patroclus was ordered to search the Caspian Sea to find out if it was still possible to sail between east and west. Patroclus' report reveals that he reached the point where the Manic waterway begins today. Here, he would almost certainly have seen all that remained was a series of streams and marshes. In an astonishing series of conquests, Alexander expanded the Greek Empire all the way to the borders of India. Like his mythic hero Jason, Alexander found immense riches in eastern lands. He realized to make his new empire work, he had to transport these lucrative goods back to Greece. The answer was to create a shipping route. Even though the river faces no longer flowed, Patroclus still had to find a connection between the Caspian Sea and the trade routes of India. Greek records tell us that Patroclus found a way to sail from the Caspian to Central Asia's mightiest river, the Oxus, a waterway that flowed thousands of kilometers to the east. Like Patroclus, I'm now heading to the southeastern shore of the Caspian in modern Turkmenistan to find the ancient connection to the River Oxus. The problem is, today, the Caspian and the Oxus are far from connected. They're separated by almost 700 kilometers of desert. Water levels have dropped so much that today it's a completely different world.
So is this all sand dunes out here?
Yeah.
And how far does that go?
Around 180 kilometers.
I want to reach the point where the Caspian ends today. For the next month, Bava will be my guide and interpreter of all things Turkmen.
He said that just take this road.
And so that's where he says the water finishes there. Well, this is probably as far as it comes. Can we stop here, Gooch? This looks right. Well, this whole place is all salt. It's what's left of the ancient sea. But over here is where the Caspian comes to an end, or at least it's how far east it travels today. So that poses an incredible riddle, because according to the ancient Greeks, they were able to sail right across here and up to the Oxus. So the riddle is, what happened to the river?
The Greeks describe a vast waterway where trade from the Oxus could be transported to the west. It's hard to imagine that this barren, salty landscape was once a busy and fertile shipping route. To prove that Patroclus' journey was possible, I need to find a trace of the ancient riverbed. Our search leads us into one of the most extreme places on Earth, the Karakum Desert. Summer temperatures can reach 52 degrees Celsius. In the depths of winter, they plummet to a bone-freezing 40 below. This is virgin territory for all of us. According to Bava,
no outsiders, and few locals even attempt crossing this sea of sand.
If it looks a bit deeper, a bit sticky, the mud.
Yeah.
Do you think we should turn around?
I think so. You know, it might rain too, so let's not take a risk.
We're following the dry and broken bed of a river that today is called the Osboy. Could it once have been a branch of the mighty Oxus Delta that Patroclus recorded? 200 kilometres into the desert, and the Osboy is starting to show signs of water flow.
Looks like a moonscape, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Incredibly barren and very, very lonely.
Tracking the river's course from higher ground is too difficult, so Bava's arranged a more traditional mode of transport. Friend Toli has agreed to take us out on horseback, so we can get down to the Osboy bed and explore.
That's interesting.
If you're wondering why Toli's actually putting on a costume, it's not for us, it's not for show. It's so traditional here that they couldn't bear the thought of actually getting on a horse without looking like a Turkoman warrior. There's a saying right here all throughout this country that paradise is on the back of a horse. Locals like Toli are known as the Artili, people of the horse. They're quite possibly descendants of the ancient settlers that came here when this was a verdant water world. The rest of the team will follow with all the gear, food and water in this monster. A Russian Kamaz, without a doubt, one of the toughest vehicles ever made. In this barren and desolate region, there's a ruin that stands as a monument to ancient river culture. This is the only substantial fortress to be unearthed on the broken watercourse of the Osboy. It was part of a settlement called Igdikala, and it was built around 200 AD, 500 years after the voyage of Patroclus.
It's like it was yesterday. It's amazing that probably a good-sized town lived in this place, whether it was a place where there was taxes collected by water traffic or whether it was completely dry here and it was actually caravans coming through. It shows you how climate change can totally change a place. People could not live here today. It's far too dry and there's no water. It's all salt water.
It's all that remains of a once thriving ancient city. Perched on high ground, Igdi would have been perfectly placed to guard the flow of people and trade. But the very presence of this fortress town suggests that even after the time of Patroclus, water levels here were still far higher than they are today. In the time of the ancient Greeks, the Oxus was a mighty floodway, as wide as the Egyptian Nile. The problem is, the Osboy is a slow, meandering river. These gorges are just 100 metres across at their widest points. That's only 300 feet. The Oxus would have been at least 5 times as wide. So there's just no way the Osboy could be the river connection I'm looking for. We've travelled over 350 kilometres across the Karakum Sands. And we're going to spend another freezing night in the desert.
Hey, thank you. fantastic. Basically, it's a whole sheep, boiled, and this is the juice. And it's fantastic. It's cold outside, and this is really warm. And the vodka is helping.
Vodka is best.
Vodka is best.
And давай, чин-чин.
Chin-chin.
Okay, come back.
This has always been a land rich in resources. This fiery crater is seeping natural methane gas. It was ignited only 40 years ago, but it's earned the name Gate to Hell. In ancient times, sailors like Patroclus could use this kind of geographical landmark to navigate. And these extraordinary natural phenomena inspired Greek legends. Aristotle would have told Alexander of the gods and monsters believed to have roamed the lands of the East. I believe somewhere in this mysterious, deserted terrain are signs of the ancient Oxus river delta that Patroclus described. The vital link in Alexander the Great's vision of a shipping route between East and West. There's one forgotten theory that could hold the key. In 1898, Ellsworth Huntington, professor of geography at Yale University, analysed the fluctuation of the Caspian. He declared that the Osboy was not a river at all, but part of an estuary. Water levels were still so high in the time of the ancient Greeks that the Caspian and the Aral Seas were larger than they are today. And the terrain between the seas would have been covered with water, making a series of vast wetlands. Huntington's theory helps explain how Patroclus was able to sail east from the Caspian into the great delta of the Oxus. After 10 days of trekking through some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth, we find what we've been looking for. But I was completely unprepared for the grandeur of the ancient shore. Standing here, it's clear that this was once the edge of a great inland sea.
So, if this theory is correct, what it means is that the sea level, all the way from the Caspian right through to here and to the Aral, was much higher. Now, where I stopped up there is 250 feet, and that's where they reckon that the sea level got to. So this place was an inland waterway, and the Greeks, according to this theory, could have sailed right past here.
"2,300 years ago, this would have been a maze of river channels and countless reed beds. A bountiful wetland, just as Patroclus and the Greeks reported. I've heard that to the north lie the ruins of a magnificent city, settled by the Persians around the time Alexander travelled east. It's clear to see that the city was built on the edge of a headland and would have dominated the waterfront.
This is the great fortress of Dev Kessen. Today, Dev Kessen lies right on the Turkmenistan-Uzbekistan border in no man's land.
The trenches for the border, is it?
It's off limits, but amazingly, Bava gets us through. Being able to enter this fortress is a first, even for him.
That's an old defensive wall out there. This is a city in here.
The city's built upon a 30-metre high escarpment. It was protected from attack by a system of moats and defensive walls that lead back through the city entrance to the central citadel, or Arg.
Have you ever seen a gate or an entrance like this anywhere? It's quite incredible. It's the shape of a battle axe or a semicircle. That would have been one drawbridge and one moat. And then over here, there's a whole nother moat. Another drawbridge would have taken you into the city.
You can sense the ancients here. A place of such obvious prosperity must hold so many stories of life, death, and ultimately collapse. The first settlers would likely have been followers of an ancient monotheistic religion called Zoroastrianism. But this shrine dates back to more recent medieval occupation and the arrival of Islam 900 years ago. As the wetlands upon which the city depended dried up, Dev Kessen's eventual demise was inevitable.
Well, I'm absolutely blown away by this place. It is magnificent, and particularly because it hasn't been robbed. Basically, as far as archaeology is concerned, it's intact. But if you can imagine what this place was like, people lived here from about 400 BC, perhaps earlier, all the way through to about 1550, 1600. Now this would have been an enormous gate into the central Arg where the Khan would have lived. And behind me, on the top there, would have probably been originally a Zoroastrian burial site. But really, this is an amazing fortress.
But Dev Kessen is not alone. Along this ancient sea coast are more than half a dozen ruined cities and citadels. And like Dev Kessen, all of them are built on high ground. The signs are everywhere of a massive drop in water levels.
Well, this is quite a hole in the ground, this. Wow. And I think, quite obviously, at the well, and I don't really want to actually topple into it because if I have a look down, well, it's a good 30 metres. And what it is an amazing indicator of what these people went through over the centuries, because it probably started where the water level was much higher, as quite shallow. And then as the water has shifted away and drained away, they've had to tunnel and tunnel. And it's a hell of a long way. This would have had a huge contraption above it with donkeys pulling up big buckets of water, which would have been the water for the whole city. It's an incredible thing to have remaining. Usually these get filled in quite quickly. This one's completely intact, and it's quite marvellous. And there's something down there. Woo, here he comes. Hey.
The story of the lost city of Dev Kessen is a century-by-century gauge of the radical climate change that happened here. What's remarkable is that the very same thing is taking place today. We're heading even further north in the wake of the ancient Greeks into the former Soviet Union, modern-day Uzbekistan. I'm looking for the coast of the Aral Sea, and 60 years ago, this wasn't desert, but seabed. Just 2 generations ago, fishing fleets harvested great shoals of fish here.
Like the aftermath of a tsunami, the last of the Aral fishing fleet lies scattered, like children's toys in the sand. But here the end was not caused by the sudden impact of an enormous wave. The people of the Aral literally watched their livelihoods slowly ebb away. We finally make out the grey blue of the seashore. This coastline has retreated by almost 100 kilometres. With no rainfall to speak of, the Aral relies exclusively on the waters of the ancient Oxus and the Oxus. But these rivers have been so depleted by the impact of Soviet irrigation schemes that hardly a drop reaches the Aral shores. It ranks as one of Earth's greatest environmental disasters. Today, this sea is on the brink of extinction.
According to my GPS, it's about 54 feet above mean sea level. That's about 16 metres. Now that's an incredible change from the 1960s, when the sea level was 100 feet higher than where I'm standing. What's also incredible, it's incredibly cold. It's about -2 degrees. My hands are absolutely numb, and operating this thing is quite difficult.
Patrocles records the distance from here to the Caspian, but makes no mention of the Aral Sea. Water levels here were so high, the Aral was part of a connected waterway.
What for me is amazing is that 2,500 years ago, the sea level was actually 200 feet higher. At the time of Alexander, this whole area was inundated. So what it means is our climate, and particularly this area, has been very, very changeable over thousands of years, much more changeable than we've ever thought.
Like Patrocles, we've travelled across the Caspian all the way to the Aral Sea. Now we're heading south towards Afghanistan to reach the Oxus River. In the time of the ancient Greeks, it would have been a leisurely sail from here to the Oxus Delta. But for us today, it's a 300-kilometre drive. After 2 weeks of desert travel, we're about to reach our goal. When the Greeks arrived, they found the heart of a civilization that was already more than 2,000 years old.
Well, this is it, the Oxus, what they called the great parent stream of humanity. And it was supposed to have rocked the cradle of our race. Now today, it still flows 2,500 kilometres from the roof of the world almost to the Aral Sea. It is one of the world's great rivers.
Today, it disappears not far from here in 1,000 irrigation canals. But in the time of Patrocles, this river was in full flow. He'd succeeded in his mission. Patrocles confirmed that just as Alexander had imagined, this great river did carry trade from India through Central Asia to the Caspian Sea. Now I want to cross the river to find out more about the Oxus civilization the Greeks discovered here. These Turkmen are on a cattle drive, and they're heading for the same place we are, a ferry boat. Today, only half a dozen of these old Soviet-era ferries operate along the river. The traffic slowly died as the Oxus trade diminished, countries and borders changed, and roads and vehicles spread.
Well,
barges like this have been going up and down the Oxus for a long time. Right through the Soviet period, you could actually sail from the Aral Sea. Today that's not possible, but in the Greeks' time, this river would have been full of traffic.
Nowadays, these ferry crews are among the last of the Oxus rivermen, a tradition that stretches back to the Greeks and beyond. Long ago, the Oxus was an ancient highway with thousands of settlements, citadels and fortresses spread out across its tributaries. And there's one place, now deep in the desert, that straddled this system over 4,000 years ago. These are the ruins of the city of Gonur. In its heyday, it was a huge trading centre in a series of Bronze Age states that stretched for over 100 kilometres along the Oxus Valley. Discovered in 1972 by Soviet archaeologist Viktor Sarianidi, this city footprint has changed the way we think about the ancient world. Even today, it's clear to see Gonur's maze of streets. It's an extraordinary experience to stroll through the alleyways of a city that was flourishing in the Bronze Age, over 1,500 years before the arrival of Alexander. The people that lived here fired ceramics in kilns, grew grain and raised livestock. Archaeologists have even found traces of a sophisticated irrigation system. And what's really amazing is the city's layout. A rectangular settlement enclosed by powerful defensive walls and semicircular bastions. Gonur was an imperial city. Inside its fortified palace complex were royal living quarters and funeral chambers. These excavations reveal that, like ancient Egypt, royal tombs were filled with golden treasures and animals to sustain them in the afterlife.
Well, Baba tells me that this is most likely the king's horse because it's buried just next to his burial chamber. And it just shows you for how long the horse has been revered in this land. Almost 5,500 years. I guess nothing's really changed here.
Gonur was a major commercial centre, comparable to ancient cities in Egypt and the Indus Valley. It seems like it sprung from the desert, but thousands of years ago there was water all around.
Well, once this was actually full of water. This was probably the king's reservoir. And this was a filtration system that took the mud out of the river or the canal water, so it was pure. But then something went radically wrong, and this place was abandoned.
Gonur and its sister cities vanished just as mysteriously as they'd appeared. So, how can this all be explained? How could a civilization simply appear, thrive for 500 years or more, and then just as mysteriously disappear?
Really, that's just another example of just how fragile human society really is. These places thrived, and then they were turned to dust. Conquering armies like Alexander may have sped up the process, but really it's been the environment that's decided the fate of mankind.
Behind the demise of Gonur lies the extreme climate change that altered the course of the Oxus.
The whole place is covered in salt. Wow. Well, this is incredible. This is an ancient lake. Now, my GPS has brought us here and it's confirmed the research that I've been doing. Basically, all the way from Afghanistan right through here to the Caspian is a low depression. Now, I think it's the bed of the ancient river, because all of these lakes actually were once full, and carbon dating has shown that 5,000 years ago, this was actually a huge swampland. When it had too much water, or the river changed course, it came through here, flooded these lakes, and this was an entirely different world.
Through the ages, the changes in the course of the Oxus have been so volatile, locals named it Ceyhun, the crazy river. This is my last night with Bava and the guys. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to even attempt this journey, following the trail of ancient pioneers who crossed the globe when this was a water world.
So it was the Oxus, the Ceyhun, the crazy river, that determined how civilizations developed here. The river changed its course, destroying one civilization and giving birth to another. An incredible river in this amazing land.
In the time of Alexander, the Greeks ventured into a lost world. Along the Oxus, they discovered a forgotten Bronze Age culture so magnificent it rivaled any on Earth. The Greeks were inspired by the legend of Jason and the Argonauts to search for a shipping route between the East and the West. And Patroclus' extraordinary mission proved that once the Oxus did indeed flow through to the Caspian. Today, all that's missing is the water. But far from the end of our journey, this is just the beginning. Changing sea levels and disappearing rivers are not all the Greeks tell us. Intriguing accounts of Alexander's conquests in Persian territory lead us to the fabled city of Bactra, that today lies across the border in Afghanistan.
One of the problems about exploring places like this is these areas are full of landmines.
A place where ruined fortresses, settlements and age-old infrastructure still survive. Echoes of a lost culture that thrived here long before the rise of ancient Greece.
This would be one of the rarest things you could find here. It's probably something like 3,500 BC.
In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Inspired by heroic tales of Eastern lands, Alexander forged new frontiers for the ancient Greek Empire. His army campaigned along the River Oxus to capture cities governed by their Persian rivals.
2,500 years ago, the cities of the Oxus made up an incredible civilization. They were the equal of anywhere else on Earth. But then, that would all be changed by one man. Here they call him the devil Ixander. We know him as Alexander the Great. And at the head of a huge army, in just a few years, he would change this civilization forever.
Today in modern Afghanistan, the cities that Alexander found are all but lost. But traces of fortresses, settlements, and age-old infrastructure still survive. Echoes of a culture that once thrived here. I want to find the fabled capital occupied by Alexander, the ancient city of Bactra. This is the heavily patrolled border of Afghanistan and Turkmenistan, one of the most remote and little used borders on Earth. Getting permission to film here was never going to happen. So my cameraman Greg decides to accidentally leave his camera on. There's a 2-kilometre stretch of no man's land before you reach the Afghan border post, and neither side provides transport. So we find a truck driver who, for a fee, agrees to take us across.
Thank you very much.
This electrified fence encloses a minefield. It stretches for more than 800 kilometres along the border, and every 15 or 20 kilometres there's a defence post. Visitors are not welcome here. Almost no Westerners cross this border. Taliban insurgency has been on the rise in northern Afghanistan. Security is tight and border guards are edgy. At the midway point, we're stopped and called over by the Afghan guard on duty.
Hello. This camera's all check. Look here.
Greg makes out like he's just cleaning the camera lens.
Are you from in Afghanistan? Kabul?
The question is the guard going to let us in, or is he going to turn us back?
Ah, good. So
Then we
check by
realise
badge.
he's called
Very
for a
good.
vehicle.
We get a badge. Thank you very much.
The guard drives us out of no man's land to the Afghan border post.
Documentary.
We've reached the Afghan side,
Just put it up there, Greg.
but it's not over yet. The last step is to pass the customs check.
That's the waterproof camera case.
این مربوط به کامera میشه که برام باشه کامera نیم.
We've just crossed over into Afghanistan. In ancient times, this was another world. The land of Bactria, the greatest kingdom ever to rise along the River Oxus. Like Alexander, I want to find the capital, the fabled city of Bactra. For Alexander, taking control of Bactra was of major strategic importance in his fight against the Persian Empire. But to date, archaeologists have found no absolute proof of its location. So, where is the ancient capital that Alexander and the Greeks knew as the mother of all cities? We're heading into the Afghan wilderness. Out here, roadblocks and hijackings are all too common.
Ravaged by war, this region has been off limits for historians and archaeologists for decades. Westerners are a target, and so I've come with as small a crew as possible. Our driver Habib and our guide Reza have spent the last few years dodging bullets, trying to document the ancient sites around here. We travel in daylight, at full speed, and don't stop for anything. We make it into the relative safety of And Hoi, one of the oldest centres of trade in Central Asia. There's no tourism out here, but luckily Reza knows a bloke who owns a tea house, our sanctuary for the night.
This is fine. I would almost say palatial. Yeah. That's great. Cheers. Good to meet.
I've come to And Hoi because I want to explore the bazaar. This part of Afghanistan has always been famous for trade in commodities like wool and lambskin, and today nothing's changed.
Well, this is the market of And Hoi. It's one of the most famous in the world because it's basically intact. It hasn't changed probably in thousands of years. And people have been trading here and buying and selling grapes for that long. But the main thing it's known for is carpets.
The Turkmen-style carpets made here are some of the finest in the world. The craftsmen in workshops like this one are continuing a tradition that's been passed down for generations. And there's a clue to the ancient city of Bactra woven into these carpets. Reza tells me that they're much more than just antique rugs. If you look closely, you can see that they're living pictographs of ancient fortifications.
So is this based on the design of castles and citadels, these designs?
Yes, sometimes because it's really old, and sometimes it's copied from the castle. And the old people remember the, for example, the castle or the kings or other very big building. So they're copying, yeah.
Wow.
Here is a revealing connection to our search for Bactra. Since the earliest of times, the Bactrian Empire was known as the land of 1,000 cities. The geometric patterns in these carpets reflect the heavily fortified cities of Bactria. The trouble is, they're so stylized, it's hard to get a real indication of what one particular city actually looked like.
That's lovely, huh? Look at that. Okay, I say 180. Thank you very much.
It's not only the carpets that connect us to ancient Bactra. If you want to look into the face of an ancient Bactrian,
look no further. Today, the Turkoman and the Uzbeks are ethnic minorities. But in essence, they're the same people. Northern Afghanistan is a patchwork of cultures that often don't see eye to eye. But they do have one great thing in common: their ancient past. I want to find out more about the defences Alexander came up against when he invaded this ancient realm. We've come from the Afghan border to Andhoy, and now we're heading for an archaeological site called Emesh Tepe, one of the great perimeter fortresses of Bactria. This has been frontier territory since ancient times. Even today, Emesh Tepe is a commanding vantage point in the arid borderlands between modern Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. Although there are no obvious ruins here today, this was once an imposing fortified town. Built by the Persians soon after they conquered Bactria around 500 BC. That's almost 200 years before Alexander arrived.
Well, I know this place looks a little bit like a football stadium after a sandstorm. So what we're going to do is try and bring it to life with a few tricks of photography and a little bit of computer work to show you what this was like about 2,500 years ago.
It's not until you actually get down into it that you get an idea of its scale. Almost 2 kilometres in circumference. But what's extraordinary is because of their location, very few of these citadels have ever been explored.
What we're attempting to do with this marvellous Italian invention here is to actually take 360 degrees of photographs. And there's a little notch down here which is marked in all the different points of the compass. And so what we do is click it around and take a photograph each time. And then this little spirit level here, which Rosa is going to monitor so it doesn't move, is hopefully going to keep the pole really straight. So we zip it round in a circle, and then hopefully you'll be able to see this at 360 degrees. Okay, you right?
The big realisation for me is that this part of Afghanistan was far from a remote backwater. Two and a half thousand years ago, it was part of an advanced civilization, home to a community of thousands of Bactrians and Persians. Protected by its mighty walls and impregnable citadel. Emesh Tepe was just one of a series of fortresses that made up a state-of-the-art defense system, earning Bactria a reputation as the land of 1,000 cities. And like Alexander and his 30,000 strong army, I want to find the Bactrian capital. Today, the ruins of the city of Bactra are thought to be near the modern town of Balkh. And that's a 5-hour drive away. By the time Alexander reached the valley of the Oxus, he'd won a series of decisive victories against his Persian enemy. And instead of fighting Alexander, the local Bactrians submitted to his rule. We're trying to avoid unplanned stops, but we've still got to eat.
Habib has brought us to one of his favourite spots. Well, this is your typical chai hana, or restaurant. And in the middle of the day, everybody stops and they come to these different places. They're all over the place. The ancient Greeks were renowned for their hospitality, a principle they called xenia. Here, Alexander would have found that just like Greece, it was usual for locals to take care of travellers, provide them with a place to sleep and enough food to eat. The food here is fantastic. You've got fresh onion and tomato, you've got lovely rice and meat, soups, and then fantastic Afghan bread, which is delicious hot. And it's a really nice environment all the time. So it's really the way to eat in Afghanistan. Finally, we make it safely into Balkh. The ruined citadel here is generally believed to be ancient Bactra. But I have some issues with this theory that I want to put to the test. The size and grandeur of this place simply takes your breath away. Wow, that's enormous. Well, this is it. This is Balkh. And this huge cauldron here is the Bali Hisar, the high wall. And inside it, well, history unfolded. When Alexander's army marched into Bactra in 329 BC, it was already a great city. And it became his centre of operations in the battles to come. In almost every corner of this immense fortress, there's evidence of invasion. Well, I can't really be sure if this is a man or a woman, or indeed how old the skull is. But what it does illustrate is the amount of human remains all throughout Balkh. And the reason for that is that Balkh was sacked an unbelievable 800 times in its history. Balkh has been built up and wiped out so many times, we're walking across layer upon layer of human settlement. These walls are full of lots and lots of secrets. The problem is, people are looking for them all the time. They're treasure hunters and they're digging up this place. It's like a rabbit warren. They're looking for gold, they're looking for coins and rings to sell. As well as local looters, archaeologists have been digging up the past. But to date, none of the finds from this citadel can be traced back to the time of the Greeks or even the Persians. Balkh citadel seems to have been founded much later, only reaching its peak during the golden age of Islam in the 8th century. More than 1,000 years after the Greeks had come and gone. I have doubts about whether the ruins of Balkh are really the remains of the Bactrian capital Alexander made his base camp. So, if not here, where is ancient Bactra? Tomorrow, I want to look for clues in the modern centre of Balkh. It seems we're quite a hit in Balkh Market. Every man and his dog wants to know what we're up to.
Yeah, I'm David. David.
Is the film action?
It's some action, yes. Well, according to all the histories, Balkh has been here for a very, very long time.
And for almost all of that time, it's been a centre of culture and a centre of trade.
The streets here are full of beliefs and relics from the distant past.
And this is the oldest mosque in Afghanistan. In fact, it's the oldest mosque in Central Asia. It dates from about 800. And what's so special about it is it has influences from Greek, from Buddhist and Persian. What it means is at that time, all of those influences were here. So this is a remarkable time capsule of religion and the belief in God.
Balkh has long been a meeting point for Eastern and Western culture. But at the 700-year-old Islamic madrasa, or school, not everyone is so welcoming. These are talibs, religious students of Islam. Maybe Taliban, maybe not. Either way, they don't look too thrilled to see us, so we give them and the grand old madrasa a miss. Since 2001 and the fall of the Taliban government, beards are no longer fashionable, and the barber business is booming. For Afghans today, the Taliban are just one in a long line of invaders. 30 years ago, it would have been a Russian officer submitting to the barber's razor. In the Middle Ages, it could have been an Arab or a Mongol soldier. And in 329 BC, the invader was Alexander the Great. Through the years, Afghanistan has been attacked, destroyed and rebuilt by almost everyone. Like every town in this region, here in Balkh, history is for sale. Selling antiquities here is forbidden by law, but it's almost impossible to police. And Reza knows a guy who knows a guy that sometimes deals in antiques. What I'm looking for here is a clue to ancient Bactria at the time of the Greeks.
Now these pieces are incredible. They're from lots of different periods. You've got really ancient icons like the griffin and the lion. It's just this little collection on this handkerchief is just a treasure trove.
But this is a piece that doesn't quite fit.
Does he have any idea where he found this, where it was from?
مگه فکر میکنه از کجا پیدا کردن خودتون از کجا یافتش؟
والله این هرم داره
Daulatabad?
Yes, he says from Daulatabad. I mean the farmer came from Daulatabad, brought with him.
This would be one of the rarest things you could find here. This is actually, it's bronze, and etched into it is a story, and it's probably a really, really ancient story, maybe ancient Persian, maybe even older.
It's called a cylinder seal, and it's engraved with pictures that tell a story.
So you basically roll this out. It can be into mud, so it can be left in the sun. And then there is the remains of what was an amazingly carved chapter of either a legend or somebody's life. Now you find these all over this part of the world, and they're very old. If this was found out at Zadian, was it?
Yeah, north of Balkh.
That means it's probably something like 3,500 BC, so 5,500 years old. It could be. So if you ever see one of these in an antique shop, take it to a museum.
Yeah.
If the cylinder seal came from the north, in Zadian, it points to the existence of a far more ancient civilization somewhere out on the dried-up Bactria Delta, once a tributary of the Oxus River. Another clue is the vast network of ancient canals that lead north across the delta. Much of the system now lies empty and broken,
But in ancient times, they watered more than twice as much land as today.
So canals like this have been watering bulk for a very, very long time. And today, if you follow them around through the countryside, what they lead you to is life. It's surprising how cold it is, but then again, it is glaciated water, and it's not that far away from where it all comes from. It's amazingly refreshing on a day like this.
Irrigation here is everything. Without it, the land would rapidly become a desiccated dust bowl. If the ancient capital was located further north, on the Bactra River Delta, then these canals must have watered it. My hope is they just might lead us to our goal. Like Alexander and his troops, we're heading for Zadian, a place rarely, if ever, visited by outsiders. This is a war zone. We need special permission to come out here. The road takes us deeper into remote areas of Afghanistan sympathetic to the Taliban. American and German armoured units do patrol the region, but patrols are sporadic. This is not a place you want to get lost in. But Reza knows a Muslim cleric, or mullah, who told him of ancient ruins in the area. Finally, we reach Zadian. Reza introduces me to the mullah. He tells us about the history of his town and directs us towards its famous minaret.
It's the oldest minaret in Afghanistan, he says. Yeah, oldest minaret in Afghanistan. As you cannot find any minaret more older than this minaret in Zadian.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We actually didn't come here to see this minaret, even though it's the oldest in Afghanistan. We've actually come here to use it as an observation tower for something much, much older.
It was built in the 13th century, and to have such an old minaret meant that this place, at least during the early Islamic period, must have been an important centre. It's a dry and lifeless place. It's hard to visualise how these lands could ever have supported farming, let alone a civilization. But in the distance, we can see the walls of a huge ancient structure.
Well, what Reza's been telling me is incredible. Out beyond that citadel are mounds and mounds and mounds. They're the remains of cities. This whole area was a civilization, at least 2,500 years old and probably older. But what's really incredible is that no one has been out there and explored it properly. It's a civilization waiting to be discovered.
Today this place is called Kafir Kala, Arabic for non-believers' castle. But when Alexander and his army pushed their way north, it would have been a thriving Bactrian community. Not surprisingly, very few archaeologists have ever been out here. Since the late 1970s, the endless Afghan conflicts have made any meaningful exploration almost impossible.
As we approach, I start to get a real sense of its size. These ramparts are more than 12 metres high. This was once a mighty fortified settlement with a large population. It's like a moonscape, isn't it? Well, it's about 42 degrees, 43 degrees. One of the problems about exploring places like this is these areas are full of landmines. And unless you're traveling with someone like Reza, who actually knows where to walk here, you've got to be really, really careful and just follow the paths. Zadian was ravaged by heavy fighting in the 1980s when Russian forces were in control of Afghanistan. This place became a stronghold of Afghan Mujahideen resistance. But as you can see, it's an incredible fortress. And amazing that only a few years ago it was used by the Afghans as a fortress to fight the Russians. Let's go down. Is this lost city the ancient capital? The massive defensive walls run through the desert for more than 100 kilometres. But it appears the stronghold itself just isn't big enough to be the city of Bactra. It must have been another perimeter fortress town. Just like the fortress at Emesh Tepe, it would have been an important part of a defence system that spread for hundreds of kilometres across Bactria. But it's not what we've been looking for. This region is so vast, finding a fabled city that disappeared over 2,000 years ago was never going to be easy. We begin the trek back to civilization deflated. It seems we've run out of options. But here in Afghanistan, news travels fast. A good mate of Reza's, named Mahbub, has heard that we're interested in ancient sites and asked to meet us.
Salam alaikum. Mahbub John.
It's the day before Navruz, the annual spring festival. And, like all Afghans, Mahbub's family are having a traditional open house. What a beautiful house. Navruz has been celebrated here every year for millennia, commemorated by Bactrians, Persians, and after Alexander's conquest, even the ancient Greeks.
I understand about the festival.
Mahbub's family are very much modern Afghans, keeping one eye on the present and the other on the traditions of the past.
That looks fantastic. Wow.
2,000 years ago, our people, they had to have 7 fruit because 7 fruit represent a new life. And we try, Afghan people, to continue this tradition.
Recently, Mahbub and his father were guides to a team of French archaeologists.
So it's a very good place.
They discovered a very special site deep in the mountains to the south. And he tells us that on the way to the French archaeological dig site, there's a mysterious system of tunnels that are yet to be deciphered. Could the city of Bactra be in the mountains? A place where, until recently, no one had even thought to look. We've come 230 kilometres from the Afghan border through the city of Balkh and all the way to Zadian. Up until now, we've been searching the lowlands of the Bactra Delta, close to where it once met the Oxus River.
But the dig site lies to the south, in the rugged ranges known to Alexander the Great and the ancient Greeks as the Paropamisus. What's really exciting is that some ancient Greek reports say that Bactra lay at the foot of the Paropamisus. We eventually find the tunnels Mahbub had told us about. But then it hits me. These aren't tunnels at all. They're part of an ancient system of aqueducts and canals. Like veins beside an artery, they follow the Bactra River all the way up into the mountains.
Well, this place is an incredible labyrinth. These tunnels brought water, probably thousands of years ago, down onto the plain where Bactria is today. But the sophistication of these tunnels is quite incredible. They're much more advanced than the canals that people are using today. It just shows you what that world was like. The only problem is these places are full of wasps and bees, and I don't like wasps and bees. Ugh! One right next to my head. When I mean sophisticated, just have a look at these. These are actually bricks, and they're kiln fired. If I put my water on them, you'll see their colour. Now this is a whole detailed, amazingly structured foundation for these canals. And who knows how old these bricks are, but they're very sophisticated. It's at least 15 or 20 kilometres that these canals would have run. To build them would have taken thousands of man-hours. I mean, this was quite a civilization.
But this leaves us with a lot of unanswered questions. When was this network of canals built? And what city did it supply? We're following the broken trail of ancient Bactrian canals, and they appear to lead all the way to the French dig site. It's another 15 kilometres deeper into the mountains, along the Shulgara Valley. This was once an ancient trade link across the mountains, and it was very likely one of the routes used by Alexander's army. We're now well outside the zone regularly patrolled by coalition armoured units. The Taliban destroyed a convoy just a few kilometres south of here. And as luck would have it, it's exactly where the dig site's been located.
This place is called Sheshmi Shafa, which means the healing spring. And it's a really, really old place. People have been living here for more than 20,000 years. So what's really incredible is that French archaeologists actually found a whole city temple complex here. It ranges right across the plain and then up into these mountains. They think it's the largest in Central Asia.
We head on through the gorge. On the far side, the valley opens up into a wide and fertile wetland. To get a better view, Reza takes me to the ruins of a small frontier fort. It looks like a Garden of Eden. When Alexander arrived here, the river would have been dammed and these plains intensively irrigated, making it a rich oasis.
Well, this is about as far as the Oxus civilization came south. These citadels guarded its rear. But what this place affords us is a view back in time, because further down that river, they found evidence of people living here 20,000 years ago. Until the French archaeologists began digging, what no one had realised was that the valley had supported much more than just a frontier fort. This was one of the first places excavated, believed to be a sacred site belonging to one of the world's oldest religions. This was a Zoroastrian fire temple.
Well, this whole valley would have been full of fire towers. Right along the ridges, the whole place would have been lit up like a Christmas tree. But this shrine was special. This is the main Zoroastrian site for the whole valley. And can you imagine what this place would have been like 2,500 years ago? It would have been one of the greatest centers in Central Asia.
On top of this altar would have burnt the eternal flame. Zoroastrians believe that fire represents the light of their one God. I believe that this is Zari-Aspa, a legendary center of the Zoroastrian religion. A religion that connected a succession of empires and millions of people all over the Near and Far East. This extraordinary city temple complex would have been a place of pilgrimage for hundreds of years, long before Alexander's time. If this is Zari-Aspa, it will amount to one of the greatest discoveries in recent archaeology. And I think that there are signs in this valley of an even greater prize. Sometimes something is so large that it remains hidden in plain sight. Down beside the river is what appears to be the foundations of an enormous fortified city. Many of the Greek reports in the time of Alexander describe Zari-Aspa as a twin city. And its twin was ancient Bactra. They tell us that the two cities lay at the foot of the Parapamesus Mountains, and the Bactra River flowed past their walls. This place matches those accounts perfectly. I believe the cities the Greeks were describing are both right here. Not only is Zari-Aspa in this valley, but also ancient Bactra. High on the left bank of the river was Zari-Aspa. On the right bank was the city of Bactra. It would have been a mass of palaces, urban dwellings, and wide avenues. Easily comparable to the sophisticated cities of ancient Greece. Bactra was immense, home to tens of thousands of Bactrians and Persians. When Alexander arrived, it must have been a wondrous sight. This is truly a revelation. For more than 2,000 years, one of the Earth's greatest cities lay undetected and undisturbed in this sacred river valley. Discovering ancient Bactra is like finding the lost city of Atlantis. An archaeological and historical breakthrough of immeasurable significance. Here lies the extraordinary capital of the Oxus civilization, the mother of all cities. Laying claim to Bactra was a strategic triumph for Alexander the Great. Within 2 years, he would lead the Greeks all the way to the borders of the Indian subcontinent in a campaign that would become legend. Surrounded by a series of fortress towns like Tepe, Bactria's imposing defence system was a sign of its wealth and importance long before the arrival of Alexander. And despite the ravages of time, traces of this extraordinary ancient civilization survive today. In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here, 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. On his extraordinary 3-year-long Central Asian campaign, Alexander's army scaled the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush and crossed the mighty River Oxus, pushing the frontiers of his new empire deep into Persian territory. In Bactria and Sogdia, Alexander found highly advanced cities and religious centers. Defended by a host of volatile local tribes that vastly outnumbered the invading Greeks.
For 2 years, Alexander fought a series of running battles. Almost 120,000 people died. Now for me, how could he have possibly built any cities while he was fighting these guys?
As he traveled, Alexander is said to have built a great network of Greek cities. But is this the real story? I'm going in search of the ancient culture he conquered and the lost city that bears his name, Alexandria on the Oxus. Today, coalition forces fight for control of Afghanistan. But over 2,300 years ago, it was Alexander the Great who attempted to conquer this challenging land. I've hitched a round trip on a troop transport to get a view of the lands Alexander fought over. By the time Alexander arrived here in 329 BC, he and his army had experienced more than 5 years of war. In a series of great battles, he'd clashed with his Persian rival, fighting his way 4,000 kilometers across the earth, from Greece in the west to the borders of India in the east. Now emperor of half the known world, he'd achieved more than any conqueror before him. Alexander's army defeated the forces of his mortal enemy, Darius III, but victory wasn't sweet. Before he could capture the Persian king and force him to surrender the throne, Darius was murdered. The assassin was Bessus, the Bactrian governor. Now Bessus claimed Darius's title for himself.
Relentlessly, Alexander pursued the usurper right into the heart of the ancient land of Bactria, modern-day Afghanistan,
Gregor!
a place that is still a war zone today.
Well, this is ISAF headquarters for all of northern Afghanistan. And here there are 16 nations here to provide security for reconstruction and development here. But what's incredible is that their experience is actually similar to Alexander the Great.
The soldiers are here to protect Mazar-i-Sharif airfield. It's from here that the coalition forces' German contingent run fighter missions. And it's also the centre of operations for ground forces in northern Afghanistan. We head out of the base into the blue box, the immediate patrol area around the airfield. Roughly 400 square kilometres.
Thanks.
For this German armoured battalion, living on a knife edge is routine. The danger of ambush or IEDs, improvised explosive devices, is ever present. The patrols constantly vary their routes, but they monitor a set area and will use this road again. We've almost no information at all about what life was like here for Alexander and the Greeks. Much of what's reported about him is caught up in myth and legend. But what's certain is that Alexander's commanders would have been covering the same territory as our patrol.
So these guys are just setting a cordon around this area, make sure that there's no threat, and then they'll stay here for a few minutes and to see if everything's okay. We're about 3 or 4 Ks up into the mountains away from the base, not quite to the extent of the blue box that they call it, their patrol area, but we're definitely in country that could be a problem.
This is a land known since ancient times for its formidable defence system, rugged terrain, and hostile inhabitants. But surprisingly, Alexander marched into the Bactrian capital unopposed. When his forces arrived, instead of taking up arms, the Bactrians laid low. Alexander was not conducting an out-and-out war. He was on a manhunt. His enemy Bessus had now fled across the Oxus River. Like these German soldiers, the first thing that Alexander would have done is secure the passes and the outer checkpoints.
So how soon before you arrive are they informed that you're coming, or that they expect you?
No, I don't think so.
So it's just
Surprise.
good.
This mountain pass is just as good a site for an ambush today as it was in the time of the ancient Greeks. Over 2,300 years after Alexander's army marched through here, the Germans are taking the same military precautions. Instead of a German and an Afghan soldier, this would have been an ancient Greek or Macedonian commander checking with a Bactrian officer.
Salam alaikum. Salam.
The combined international force in Afghanistan today is double the size of Alexander's. His 55,000-strong army was outnumbered by the Bactrians. Yet remarkably, during the first 6 months of occupation, Alexander seized control of Bactrian defences and cities relatively peacefully. The renegade Bessus was betrayed by his own people and delivered to Alexander. He ordered that Bessus be tortured and killed. Now Alexander needed to make the mark of his authority in his new Eastern Empire. He is said to have founded a series of great Alexandrian cities in Central Asia. But today, we know that more than half of these settlements were already established when Alexander arrived. He simply conquered and renamed them. Alexander left the infrastructure of the Persian Empire intact. For the Bactrians, life went on pretty much as it had under Persian rule. To explore what it would have been like for Alexander to rule here, I've come to the city centre of Mazar-e Sharif, a place where old customs die hard. And there's one ancient celebration that's still a spectacle today. Navroz is the local New Year festival. As the newly self-appointed Emperor of Greater Persia, Alexander and his generals would almost certainly have presided over this, the most important event in the ancient calendar. This is a ceremony known as the Janda Borlaw, the banner raising. It's rooted in ancient Bactrian, Indian and Persian New Year cults. Today, it's an Islamic ritual. The belief is that the banners at the top of the pole have the healing powers of Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. When Alexander was here, over 2 millennia ago, kings of all the nations of the Persian Empire brought gifts to honour their emperor. Today, instead of Alexander, it's the local governor. Only leading dignitaries gain entry to the inner sanctum. Everyone else has to find whatever vantage point they can. To secure a peaceful takeover, Alexander continued these age-old traditions. But he had to be watchful for insurrection and anarchy. Locals believe that if you grab a piece of material, you'll gain some of its power. It's said that the first to touch it will be cured of wounds and disease, even blindness. We stand a very good chance of being crushed. It's time to get out of here.
We are at the gate.
Alexander stood no chance of maintaining control through force alone. The Bactrians had a highly organised infantry, and their cavalry totaled some 30,000 horsemen, a huge force, quite capable of matching Alexander's meagre 6,000 mounted soldiers. And the power of the Bactrian horse can still be seen on the plains of Afghanistan to this day. Meet Halem. Monday to Friday, he's a taxi driver. But on weekends, for a few months of the year, he's a combatant in a traditional horseback tournament called Bushkazi. The wood slats are to prevent his fibula and tibia being snapped. The padded coat is to absorb the blows of the whip. Hopefully the Russian tank helmet he's wearing is stronger than it looks. The Bushkazi matches held during Navroz are the most prestigious of the year. This is the greatest game of all. So important, it's like the Afghan Super Bowl. Before the match starts, everyone checks out the best horses. Hallam won this event last year, but the competition is pretty impressive. Have you ever seen a horse as big as this? That neck is incredible. These are such powerful animals. Have you ever wondered what Alexander's horse might have looked like? That's it. Probably black, I think, but that's about the size he would have been riding, they think. Fantastic. Today, it's the generals and the governor who preside over the game. But during his rule, Alexander would have sat here. We're told he fitted right in, adopting Persian dress and protocol. A brilliant horseman himself, Alexander may even have joined in games of strength and skill like Bushkazi. The aim is to pick up the 50-kilo headless calf, ride around the flag and back to the circle without getting beaten senseless. Originally, it would have been played with the body of an enemy. This is an echo of the ancient past, the closest thing we will ever see to a real battle from the 4th century BC. In conflict, the big Bactrian horses were used like battering rams to plough through the enemy. It would have been a ferocious slaughter. Today, deaths are rare. It's usually just bloodied faces and broken bones. Hallam has been right in the thick of it. He's had a fall and he's pretty dazed. This year, it looks like a new champion will be crowned. To the victors go the spoils. In this case, TVs and electrical appliances. It wasn't only superior numbers in battle that Alexander had to worry about. It was the hostile environment. Leaving a small force to garrison Bactria in the spring of 329 BC, Alexander and the bulk of his army prepared to move on. From the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, we're travelling across 75 kilometres of desert to the banks of the Oxus, the vast and tempestuous waterway that has shaped this ancient land. Today, it marks the northernmost edge of Afghanistan. Alexander had to cross the river to penetrate north into the ancient region of Sogdia, modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, to secure the borders of his new empire against attack by nomadic tribes. Alexander's biographers tell us that his army, crossing the desert without food or water, lost more men than in any battle. Sandstorms out here are legendary. And simply finding the crossing without good guides may have made the difference between life and death. Alexander finally reached the banks of the Oxus with his army exhausted and in disarray. After surviving the desert, he was now faced with another immense barrier: the river itself. I want to find out what it was like to cross the Oxus in the same way Alexander did. So we've picked a spot where the river's not too wide, and my new friend Osman has been preparing materials for us to build a raft. It was about March, they think, and he had about 3/4 of a mile to cross with all his troops and their equipment. It was an incredible undertaking and actually must have scared the Macedonians and the Greeks to death, because this is a very fickle and strange river. So what we're going to do is build a traditional raft in the way it was described in the descriptions about Alexander. Now what they did is actually use goat skin, just like this. It's pretty manky. This is actually salted. And what they did was turn them inside out, like that, and then sew them together and then stuff them with straw. Now these are just from the local market and they've been cut and butchered. When they saw Alexander's forces preparing to cross the river, the local tribesmen left their homes and farms and began to retreat inland. But not before they wiped out all their resources to make it harder for Alexander and his army to follow them. Well, today they're actually burning this stuff off to get new growth to come out. But in Alexander's time, they would have burned it because they didn't want him to get it. They actually burnt everything. They burnt their houses, they burnt their grain, they burnt the fields, hoping to starve them out. But Alexander's men would have been familiar with these tactics, and they were not about to starve. They might have been a bit hungry when they got to the river, and they were certainly thirsty, but the scorched earth didn't work. That's good. Let's see how heavy it is. Ah, beautiful. Let's have a look. Okay, we'll see you in a little while. See you later, thanks. With improvised rafts like this, the huge army took 5 full days to get across. Then as now, the river is travelling at a heck of a rate. For every 500 metres I paddle across, I'm being carried roughly 3 kilometres, that's nearly 2 miles, downstream. Well, this is taking longer than I thought, and of course this river is a lot faster than everybody gives it credit for. Come on. Come on. This boy. We're told Alexander's troops crossed with few losses, but there must have been sodden soldiers and horses along the river as far as the eye could see. Well, we made it. It's quite a feat. And if this river was any bigger, well, it almost would be impossible. So I'm sure that Alexander actually did this at a low point in the river, otherwise it would have been suicide. But this little raft is really fit for a king. Woo!
Now, the problem is, I've got to get back.
Alexander's army spent almost 3 years fighting to maintain their foothold, both north and south of the Oxus, in the kingdoms of Bactria and Sogdia. As he travelled, Alexander is reputed to have built a series of great cities. But how could he have managed to build cities at the same time as fighting both the elements and local tribes? A network of great Alexandrian cities is a nice idea, but I don't think it's true. When Alexander became Emperor of the East, these lands already had their own cities. I believe Alexander renamed them and little else. There's only one place we know for sure was built by Alexander, but historians believe all he constructed here was a simple fort. The rest of Alexander's cities have never been found. It's said that built on the banks of the river was the most alluring city of all, Alexandria on the Oxus. If I can find a trace of this ancient metropolis, it would mean there is some truth behind the legend of Alexander's cities in Central Asia. The first place I want to check out is an ancient site in Uzbekistan on the northern bank of the Oxus. It's likely to have been a place Alexander seized from the local Sogdian tribes.
Well, we're not actually sure where Alexander crossed the Oxus, because there's 3 or 4 crossing points all along here. But once he would have massed his troops together and crossed the river flats, he would have come up against the first Sogdian defences. Now this is Camp Tepe. Now what we're not sure of is whether it was just a fortress or whether it was a great city. And to find out, we're going to go and meet one of Uzbekistan's most eminent archaeologists.
Professor Eduard Retveladze has spent the last 30 years of his life patiently scraping away thousands of years of dust from the ancient riverbank. According to the professor's theory, Alexander constructed an elaborate Greek settlement here as a mark of his authority. It's hard to tell because more than half the site has been wiped out by the river. Though there's no question that at one time this was a spectacular city.
This gate, one side, another side. This arch.
And then this was the citadel and the palace.
Yes,
Yeah.
maybe.
Maybe palace.
Maybe palace.
Okay.
Place, in this place. This 3 part, Acropolis, Lower City, and Upper City.
Okay.
This part destroyed.
This is destroyed by Amudarya.
Yes.
By
yes.
Oxus.
Oxus. This Oxus destroyed. This place destroyed.
Takes everything.
Yes.
So you think this is Alexandria on the Oxus?
Alexandria Oxiana, yes. Alexander Oxus.
Well, what the professors found here over the last 30 years is that this was here when Alexander came through. It was a fort and he destroyed it. And what the professor thinks is that he came back and actually built a city, and it was Alexandria on the Oxus. But for us, there's a lot more to dig up before we can actually confirm that.
Is Camp Tepe old enough to be Alexander's great city? I'm not convinced. Alexander was marching north. His army probably spent only a few days here on the river at most. It's likely he simply left some Greek soldiers here to garrison the Sogdian fort, and the city developed long after Alexander had come and gone. I want to explore what remains of ancient Sogdian culture today. I've got a new guide called Güzel and a new set of wheels. There's no better way to explore Central Asia than on a cantankerous piece of Soviet engineering like a 1973 Ural 650. But it's taken Güzel a little time to adjust to life on the open road. These locals trace their ancestry back to the Sogdian warriors that challenged Alexander over 2,000 years ago. They'd refused to accept a permanent military presence in their lands, and a full-scale revolt against the Greek invaders broke out. To get an idea of what Alexander came up against, I've come to see an ancient martial art called Kurash. This style of combat is said to be more than 3,500 years old. Once skirmishing became close range, spears and swords would have been no use. Warriors had to grapple with each other in hand-to-hand combat to try and throw their opponent to the ground and create enough space to use their weapons and strike the killing blow.
These young guys have incredible skills, but can you imagine what an army of their fathers would have been like? Well, that's what Alexander came up against, and for 2 years he fought a series of running battles. Almost 120,000 people died. Now, for me, how could he have possibly built any cities while he was fighting these guys?
We know Alexander must have been daunted by the opposition, because in a letter to his mother, he wrote, "I am in the land of lion-like and brave people, where every foot of ground is like a well of steel confronting my soldiers. You have brought only one into this world, but everyone in this land can be called an Alexander." Facing battle after battle, the image of Alexander as a great city builder seems more and more unlikely. At times, it must even have seemed that he'd met his match. But Alexander found another way to win the battle. And a clue lies in customs still practiced today. Some friends of Güzel's have invited us to a party to celebrate Hatna Kilish, the coming-of-age ceremony of their youngest boy. Instead of the young man, it's the dancing girl that seems to be attracting all the attention. She's part of the entertainment. But it seems only the men are being entertained. Their wives don't seem to be having quite so much fun. Beautiful dancing girls are nothing new here. It was in Sogdia that Alexander met Roxanne, a local beauty he took as his wife. His troops had suffered defeat and heavy losses, and it seemed the Sogdians would fight him till the end. Now, Alexander tried a different tactic. By marrying Sogdian nobility, he hoped to win their loyalty and a lasting peace. I've crossed the border into Tajikistan, Here the story of Alexander and Roxanne's romance remains deeply woven into the cultural fabric to this day. And it's easy to imagine that ancient Sogdia was once as rich and colourful as this marketplace.
And if you're wondering what the Sogdians were really like, well, all you have to do is just have a look around. They're everywhere. Despite the civilizations and the different invasions, they've remained. And if you look really hard and long enough, well, you just might find Roxanne. Okay? Спасибо.
I think Roxanne's story might be the key to finding Alexandria on the Oxus. I've arranged to stay with a local family at a small farm. Then as now, farming was the main occupation. They still pick cotton, just as Roxanne's clanswomen would have done. Before their journey east, the Greeks had never seen cotton. Alexander described it as vegetable wool. His troops stuffed it in their saddlebags and carried it home to Greece, introducing cotton to Europe for the first time. Beside the cotton plants, the Oxus River Valley would have been lined with vineyards and irrigated fields planted with vegetables and grains. Here they still make food the traditional way, and they're intensely proud of their heritage. We're told that Roxanne's father, Oxyates, was a powerful local clan leader. When Alexander conquered Oxyates' fortress, instead of killing him, he invited Oxyates to become his negotiator and his sons to join the Greek army. Then he asked to take Roxanne as his wife. I believe Alexander's marriage was part of a carefully calculated political alliance with the unruly Sogdians. Many scholars believe that Alexander and Roxanne were married across the border in Afghanistan. But ask any Tajik and they'll tell you that the story unfolded right here in Tajikistan at Hisor Castle.
Well, this marvellous citadel is actually completely man-made. It must be 300 or 400 feet up here. But it's the last northerly extension of the Bactrian Empire. It's about 80 kilometres north of the Oxus, and this is about as far as they spread. And this is where Alexander came as well. He conquered this place, and even when he got here, this was an amazing citadel, a really developed civilization. They don't know how old it is. It could be 3,500, 4,000 years old. But what's also exciting is that he may have met Roxanne here, which makes it a pretty special place.
So special, in fact, that every weekend, Tajik newlyweds come here to be enriched by the romance of Roxanne and Alexander. While much is made of their love affair, it's more likely that the marriage to Roxanne served Alexander's need for a symbolic union with the locals. With Roxanne by his side, he took on the role of kinsman instead of conqueror. But I think Roxanne may have represented something even more valuable to Alexander than a political alliance. She was a link to their gods. And there's a hint in her name. The Greeks pronounced it Roxana, but it may originally have been Vakshana, which would mean she belonged to the Vaksu, an ancient name for the Oxus River. So by marrying Vakshana, Alexander was cleverly creating a union with local water deities. In so doing, he would have been seen to bathe in the light of immortality, an all-powerful new leader. So if this is correct, it's more than likely Alexander actually married his bride on the banks of the river. He could have chosen the site of a revered local temple to build his city, Alexandria, on the Oxus. Our search for this lost city has taken us from Mazar-i-Sharif, across the Oxus River, to the ancient fort of Campa Tepe. Then on through the farms of Tajikistan to Hisor Castle. Now we're heading 160 kilometres south to the banks of the Oxus to find the ruins of the most unique ancient water temple ever discovered in these lands. The route takes us right to the Tajik-Afghan border. Not a place that's open to tourists.
They don't allow many people to come here.
You need a special permit.
Yeah.
We've been given access on the condition that the army is with us every step of the way. This is Takta Sungin. When Alexander married Roxanne in 327 BC, it would have been one of the most magnificent sites on the River Oxus, an established centre of pilgrimage belonging to one of the world's oldest religions.
So this is what they call the temple on the Oxus. And it's a very, very difficult place to get to. As you can see, we're right on the river. And on the Tajik side, this is a very, very secure border and it's guarded all the time. Now this was only excavated about 6 or 7 years ago, first by the Japanese. Before then, it was untouched. But it's an incredibly important site because it goes back before Alexander the Great, or at least that's what they think now. So it's at least 500 BC. And what it gives us is an idea that these societies and this civilization was actually incredibly rich before the Greeks came. So this must have been a hallway going right through. And this drainage system is amazing because that's very advanced.
This was a very special temple complex, belonging to an ancient religion called Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrians worshipped a universal creator. And for them, fire and water were agents of ritual purity. In ancient times, it's likely ceremonies took place in the sacred waters of the Oxus. As Alexander's army conquered this land, most towns were abandoned or destroyed. But Takta Sungin was left largely intact. Why would Alexander have spared it? perhaps because it was dedicated to the same sacred river as his bride-to-be, Vakshana. It may even have been the auspicious setting for his imperial wedding. So could this be Alexandria on the Oxus? It was a thriving riverside settlement, and some of the artifacts discovered here are Greek in origin. Tuktosungin appears to have been used by locals and Greeks long after Alexander's conquest. In my search for Alexandria on the Oxus, this extraordinary place is, I believe, a definite contender. But if this is Alexander's lost city, then yet another piece of his legend will crumble away. It is certain that he didn't found or build Tuktosungin. This marvelous temple city was already here, long before Alexander arrived. Alexander led his army on a phenomenal mission to the River Oxus, the ancient heart of a lost world. His conquests are seen as the greatest triumph in the history of the Greek Empire. But that could be as far as the truth behind his legend really goes. In Central Asia to date, not one of his fabled Alexandrian cities has ever been unearthed. Far from bringing civilization to the barbarous peoples of the East, Alexander found a series of highly advanced centers. As the audacious new emperor of the East, Alexander faced resistance at every turn. He forged alliances here. But so far, I've found no convincing evidence of the magnificent riverside city he is reputed to have built on the Oxus. In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Like Alexander and his army, I'm venturing into hostile and challenging territory to find a trace of one extraordinary city.
Oh, wow.
Alexander is reputed to have founded beside the River Oxus.
Well, I'm actually standing in a Greek amphitheatre. And in 250 BC, Greek plays were being performed here to crowds of up to 5,000 people.
I'm going to explore a series of ruins that may hold the key, both to Alexander's lost city and to an astonishing civilization that flowered here thousands of years before the Greeks arrived. This is the story of how the Greeks built a dazzling eastern capital in a remote corner of Afghanistan, the city of Lady Moon. Alexander the Great is the iconic hero of ancient Greece. In a series of victories, Alexander crushed his Persian enemy, Darius III, and claimed for himself the title of Emperor of the East. But Alexander's conquest in Central Asia may not have been all it appears. I want to separate the fact from the fiction. As Alexander pushed his way deeper into Persian territory, he came up against intense resistance. In the kingdoms of Bactria and Sogdia, local tribes fought his army in pitched battles every step of the way. It took all the Greeks' resources just to garrison the territory they'd claimed. Legend has it, Alexander founded as many as 16 cities in Central Asia alone. But today, we know that more than half of these cities were already established when Alexander arrived. Settlements Alexander renamed, and little else. There's only one place we know for sure was built by Alexander. And archaeologists believe all he constructed here was a wooden fort. The rest of his cities have never been found. If I can find a trace of just one ancient metropolis built at Alexander's command, it would mean that there is some truth behind the legend. And there's one fabled city upon the Oxus River that I want to find. I'm following the tracks of Alexander into Afghanistan. Today, this region is a desert, covered with rutted sand tracks that lead everywhere and nowhere. I've met up with my driver Habib and our guide Reza. We're searching for one of Alexander's river crossing points, but we're already lost.
Can we ask them? And hopefully these guys are going to know where the crossing is.
Salam alaikum.
خودت امیتو که ما میاره بریم همین سرکنی؟
Aqtifa.
همین آقتپه؟
We've come down here, and
Yeah.
we're just there.
The village?
Yeah.
Aqtepe.
And see, it says it crosses here, but no.
نه هم سر شهر اقتفا میره باز دوسون میریم دو طرف بریم دو جا تا میشه.
بله.
Well, life's going to get very interesting. We don't even know if we can cross the river. We're heading west to find the ancient ruin of Kayazal. It sits upon the confluence of the Oxus and its largest tributary, the Kunduz River. This was once a strategic defence post in the land of Bactria. And there's a chance this could be the place Alexander built his famous city, Alexandria on the Oxus. These desert lands are totally unpredictable, and a sandstorm is fast approaching.
Well, we've made the river and the boat's here, but we've now got this big sandstorm. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. We'll probably get through, but it means it's going to get dark really quick.
The ruins of Kayazal lie out on the edge of this delta, and it hasn't been explored by outsiders for decades. Nowadays, this is a Taliban problem area, and the crossing is guarded by local police. But our immediate problem isn't the Taliban, it's getting across. These waterways are in a constant state of flux as the river level slowly drops throughout the year, then floods every spring, cutting the villages of the delta off from the rest of the country. Over 2,300 years ago, The crossing would have been almost exactly the same for Alexander and his 55,000 strong army. On their 3-year-long campaign through Central Asia, they braved this harsh, constantly changing environment and hostile tribes. Today, in the heart of the Kunduz Delta are many villages with Taliban sympathies.
From Australia.
از استرالیا اومدن.
Very long way. Australia.
We're escorted to the police post and an audience with the local commander. He's expecting us, but he's got no idea why a foreigner has come out here. And it takes a bit of explaining.
You can tell them this is a program you can get. I don't know if they know Google. Yeah, these guys.
They know, they don't know. They
To
don't.
explain what this is not military. Okay?
Yeah.
You can, on your computer, you can have this program,
Yeah.
and it's made up of lots of different satellites, and we can zoom down. But you can explain it to them, how I have this photo.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because they might be wondering why. They probably think I'm a spy, you see, and that's all it is. It's just a printout from Google Earth.
Yeah.
But here, this is pretty revolutionary, to be able to look in on a place like this. So I'm just wanting to reassure them that I'm not a spy.
در واقع مردم تشویق کنیم که بیاین اینجا ببینن. مردمای دیگر تشویق کنیم به جای شما رو ببینن.
در استقامت پر میکنیم میگن که راتی که بود کدام خدمتی که بود ما در خدمتتون هستیم.
Eventually, we gain the commander's trust and get the all clear to explore Kaya Zal. Habib, our driver, makes a few adjustments just to keep at least some of the dust out of the engine. Out here, breakdowns are not an option. From a distance, Kaya Zal seems little more than just another flat-top hill beside the ancient Kunduz River. It's not until you reach the first line of battlements that you start to get an idea of the size of Kaya Zal. Its walls are more than 6 kilometers long. The ruins of a fortified citadel, or arg, are clear to see.
Well, this place is enormous. Even after the river's actually come through here and gouged out part of the fortifications, you can see that it really would have repelled all comers. But the riddle is, who built it? What it's pointing to is that the Greeks built it. These huge great squares, and then this enormous arg that would have sat up above here.
This site is so remote and hard to reach, it has never been excavated. So much of its story remains a mystery. Alexander's biographers tell us that more than 2,000 years ago, the Oxus and its tributary, the Kunduz, joined here and then parted again. Looking out, it's clear to see that even today only a narrow neck of sand separates the Kunduz from the Oxus. So Kaya Zal was strategically built to keep watch over the two rivers, the delta and its approaches. But its layout and design suggest that this was once a bastioned Greek city. Walking across these ruins, I really get a sense of Alexander being here.
You know, one of the things about climbing over places like this is you're actually climbing through history. And as you move around, you could think back to what it would have been like living on this river, perhaps as a Greek stationed here for the rest of your life. I don't know if it would have been soul-destroying or uplifting. It was a totally different world for them and me.
Greek sources tell us in the spring of 328 BC, Alexander's armies crossed the Kunduz and then the Oxus to try and put down a local rebellion. And the only place it's possible to cross the two rivers is right here at the ancient ford of Kayazal. This could be Alexander's city, but there's a problem. The surface pottery only dates back to a time 400 years after the arrival of Alexander.
Yeah, I think so. It's for putting the wheat and rice.
And they're big pieces.
Yeah, very big.
The truth about Kayazal's origins must lie in the layers of archaeology deep beneath this citadel's massive foundations. I can't be sure if this was Alexandria on the Oxus, but there's no doubt that he would have left soldiers here to man this strategic passage and secure his supply route. Control of vantage points like this was the key to Alexander's success. From here, he took the fight north across the rivers to suppress the fiercely independent Bactrian and Sogdian tribes. We're told Alexander had a fearsome army. There were 9 infantry units, amongst them thousands of archers and shield bearers, accompanied by over 4,000 cavalry. But to truly crush all resistance, he would have to do more than win battles. He had to maintain control of trade routes and waterways. For the Greek troops left behind to garrison local towns and villages, life would have been similar to that of these Afghan policemen today.
That's very good.
Welcome. Welcome to Kayazal.
Thanks. Hello.
We're staying in their barracks for the night.
Oh, this is great. This is fine. Yeah.
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 So
We'll get the back.
yeah, why not?
The policemen are not from around here. They're recruited from other parts of the country for a very good reason. Here, the law of the land is still dominated by tribal politics. It would be impossible for a local not to be drawn in to a web of intrigue and corruption. So the police are outsiders in this community, just like Alexander's men 2,300 years ago. For the Greeks, it would have been a hand-to-mouth experience, stationed here at the end of their known world. Just a small unit, a daunting 4,000 kilometres from their Mediterranean homeland. They had no choice but to make alliances with Bactrian and Persian chieftains. And the two cultures that had once clashed began to mix. So far, we've followed the route of Alexander's army to Kayazal. But I'm not sure that this little-known ruin could ever have been more than just a Greek garrison in Alexander's time. Now, I want to explore a place that's far more famous. It's a site called Ai Hanum, an Arabic name meaning the city of Lady Moon. Ai Hanum is the only ancient Greek metropolis ever discovered in Central Asia. It's a place many believe to be Alexandria on the Oxus, and it's right on the Afghan-Tajik border. After a secure night at the police barracks, we're back on the move. I've met up with Jamshid,
a local guide.
It's just so green. I hadn't expected it to be so fertile here.
Well, this is the time that, people are working on their fields, and they just start growing melon, watermelon.
Our next challenge is a formidable one. Ai Hanum is right in the forbidden military border zone. It's so highly protected, we first have to stop at the nearby city of Taloqan to get special permission from the governor of the province.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
And we're going to the areas that you feel. He said that then if you have any problem, call me.
Right?
Yeah.
The governor has actually had to go off. He's got a problem in a different part of the province. But he's told Jamshid that we can go up, but if we have a problem, then we should come back here and have tea with him. Trouble is, that's hours away. So we'll have to wing it a bit. We're going to get a letter of permission. We'll see how we go.
The wheels of bureaucracy do turn, but at a leisurely Afghan pace. This is one part of my journey that Alexander definitely wouldn't have had to do. It seems to be taking forever. So I head outside for a stroll through the Taloqan markets. Sadly, few outsiders ever have a chance to experience everyday life like this. The threat of attack on Westerners makes it almost impossible. The ancient Greeks were among the first Westerners to come here. They stood out from the crowd, just like me.
So what do we have?
Rice and then the raisin and some meat.
When he conquered Bactria, it's said that Alexander adopted Persian dress and acted out local customs to ensure his leadership was accepted.
Okay, you have got our.
Well done.
Bunch
We
of
need all
papers.
these?
Yes, we need all the place you're traveling. We need one paper for the people.
So for the police and for the government.
Police,
Okay.
governor.
Well done.
Like Alexander, we're heading north to the rugged terrain of Ai Hanum. This is one of the poorest regions of Afghanistan. In this arid landscape, only the river valleys can sustain life. But we hit a major obstacle. The bridge across the river has been out since heavy floods almost a year ago. We've no option but to head downstream to find another way across. Just getting through the mud to the crossing point is a trial in itself. Here the villagers have hit upon a cunning scam. They intentionally keep the road muddy to bog vehicles, then charge to help them out. And since we're foreigners, the price goes up from $5 to $60. I guess we should have brought our own donkeys. We get hooked up to the tractor, and it looks like we'll be across in no time. But we don't get very far for our money. So we resort to Plan B. The tractor driver guides us through, and some locals lend a hand. Jamshid's off-road driving skills get us safely back onto dry land.
Well, we've been travelling almost all day, done about 3 different police checks, drunk a lot of green tea waiting for our permits, but we're finally here. This is Ai Hanum, and it's absolutely vast. We haven't had a look at it yet, but it's a whole mountaintop. It just looks mind-blowing.
The site was officially discovered by the Afghan king Muhammad Zahir Shah during a hunting expedition in 1961. And when French archaeologists began excavating, they found a sensational series of ruins that were unlike anything else in Central Asia. We set up camp above the Oxus next to the border post. It's quite likely that a division of Alexander's army set up camp right here too. This would have been a strategic position guarding the river crossing into Sogdia. Across the river is Tajikistan. Ever since the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, this has been one of the most heavily defended borders in Asia. Next morning, we start to explore what remains of the city of Ai Hanum. The first thing we spot are the scars in the earth, made not by ancient hands, but treasure hunters and modern conflict. In 2001, this region was the front line between the Afghan Northern Alliance and the Taliban. Trenches and tank dugouts are still clear to see. The Taliban never succeeded in taking northeastern Afghanistan. Ai Hanum's ancient defences were too formidable. These ramparts seem just as impenetrable today as they would have been in ancient times. It looks like a barren borderland, but 2,000 years ago, this was a huge classical city. If you look closely, there's the imprint of magnificent structures all around.
Well, I'm actually standing in a Greek amphitheatre. And in 250 BC, Greek plays were being performed here to crowds of up to 5,000 people. Behind me is what remains of Ai Hanum, Lady Moon, a Greek city 4,000 kilometres from Athens.
It's astonishing to think that all the way out here in Afghanistan, this was a Greek settlement. Here people would gather to be entertained, as traditional Greek comedies and Olympian games were played out in this immense amphitheatre. At its peak, 150 years after Alexander, Ai-Hanum would have had all the riches and infrastructure you'd find in the greatest Greek cities of Mediterranean Europe. It stretched along the river for over 2 kilometres. There could have been about 10,000 people living here. Many were Greek colonists, and here they built a place that reinforced their Greek origins. Walking through the city gates, it would have been an awesome sight. Beyond the ramshackle dwellings and large stately homes was a huge waterside palace. It was a monumental statement of Greek power in Bactria. As well as being the residence of the royal dynasty, this palace was a centre for local administration. Further along the riverside was one of the largest gymnasiums of antiquity. Citizens of Ai-Hanum came here to exercise, in particular soldiers. Inside, they trained for public games. Competing against each other in wrestling and archery kept them in a state of constant readiness for battle. The temples of Ai-Hanum reveal that in this new city there was a fusion of Eastern and Western beliefs. Some were dedicated to ancient Greek gods, but others, like this Persian-style temple, likely belonged to one of the world's oldest religions, known as Zoroastrianism. Here, ceremonial fire towers represent the triumph of truth and light over darkness. Presiding over the battle was one god, Ahura Mazda. Ai-Hanum was a beacon for the Greeks on the empire's eastern frontiers. To many academics, its grandeur confirmed the heroic ideal of Alexander. Here at last was what appeared to be one of the great cities he'd built in Central Asia. But is this marvellous place really Alexandria on the Oxus? So here, in the only Greek city ever discovered in Central Asia, do we see the hand of Alexander? Well, apparently not. Archaeologists can't quite agree when major construction began here, but they think it's around 280 BC. Now that's nearly 50 years after Alexander came through here. For 200 years, this was a vibrant capital of the East, a satellite of Greek custom and learning. But Alexander couldn't have built Ai-Hanum. After nearly 3 years of almost constant warfare, in the summer of 327 BC, Alexander left Bactria with the bulk of his army. 4 years later, he would be dead, and the forts and cities he'd briefly conquered were quickly abandoned. So who did build Ai-Hanum and why? The origins of this place are still shrouded in mystery. And it's because a huge amount of the archaeology has simply been erased.
You know, every day in the fields outside Ai-Hanum, astounding discoveries are made by farmers like Khalil here. They find coins, they find gold, and sometimes even statues. But the great problem is, what does he do with it? Because in Afghanistan now, it's totally illegal to trade in antiquities. If he keeps them, he could be arrested. If he sells them, he could be arrested. But there's no agency at the moment that he can give them to where he knows that they are actually going to be held for the people of Afghanistan to view them. Until that day, it'll remain in the black market, and the treasures of Afghanistan will go across the borders into Pakistan and around the world.
Some artefacts have survived the black market, and I've heard that a local chief has filled his tea house with artefacts from Ai Hanum. Oh, wow. Well, this is amazing. I'd actually heard there was one column here, but there's it's about 6. They've been covered with whitewash, but these column capitals are remarkably intact. Carved out of local stone over 2,200 years ago, they are priceless.
Well, the irony is that if the commander hadn't taken these away and he'd left them at Ai Hanum, they probably would have disappeared. So at least they've been conserved.
This has to be the most extraordinary tea house I've ever seen. The commander has certainly picked some fantastic pieces. But what he hasn't noticed is that all these columns are now upside down. In ancient Greece, Corinthian-style capitals would have been high up by the ceiling. So, if not Alexander, who could have summoned the resources and manpower to create a whole Greek city from scratch? After Alexander died, at the age of just 33, his military commanders carved up the empire he'd created. One general, Seleucus, would command an enormous kingdom that stretched from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to Bactria. Seleucus kept control of the lucrative trade routes that crossed the lands Alexander had conquered. Caravans carted precious cargo like gold, gemstones and cotton from India in the east through Bactria all the way to Greece in the west. And the revenue would have been enough to endow the great city of Ai Hanum, the capital of this growing province. And if Ai Hanum was built by Seleucus decades after Alexander's departure, there is no way it could be the lost city I'm looking for. I want to find out what was here when Alexander and his army arrived. I'm on my way to check out an earthwork nearby, a place French archaeologists reckon to have been built during the Bronze Age. And what I find is magnificent.
Well, I'm about 5 kilometres out across the plain from Ai Hanum. What I'm walking down is an enormous canal. Now, this was dug by hand more than 2,000 years before Alexander the Great got here. Now, can you imagine how many people it would take to dig something like this? I mean, these walls are 50 feet high. This is not just nomadic horsemen who built this. This is a civilization that was advanced enough to actually employ the people to do it and then actually design this place. And it would have brought water right across the plain. It would have been an Eden here. So the question is, where was the great city that this canal fed?
It's not only the canal that has changed. It's hard to imagine a time when this was fertile ground. But once, the Oxus River followed a very different course than today. Signs are everywhere that in the Bronze Age it flowed across the middle of this plain. Irrigation systems fed a series of villages and farms that flourished here. To date, only one has been excavated, and it's called Shortagai. Well, I know this place doesn't look like much, but in fact it's incredibly important. It was excavated by a French archaeologist named Frankfurt just before the Soviets came in. And what he discovered was this place was Bronze Age. It's more than 4,000 years old. But what was really exciting was that he found that this was an Indian trading post right here on the Oxus. Now today, the Oxus is about 5 k's away, that blue line you can see. But back then, the river level was higher and it came right in here. And so, this being an Indian trading post puts a whole new spin on everything. Long before Ai-Hanum was built by the Greeks, Bronze Age traders travelled all the way from the great cities of the Indus Valley in India. They came right across the Pamir Mountains by caravan, all the way to riverside outposts like Shortagai. They carried painted pottery, gold and bronzeware. It was not only goods that travelled on these routes, but people, ideas and spiritual beliefs. Russian historians think the plain surrounding Ai-Hanum could have been the birthplace of the prophet Zoroaster, making this the spiritual heartland of the revolutionary local religion, Zoroastrianism. But if this is true, there must have been a great citadel defending it. To find out more, I visit a man who knows this place better than anyone. General Khalil Halik looks after the 125-kilometre stretch of the Oxus River that runs alongside Ai-Hanum. It turns out the general's passionate about the history of this area. He tells me that there's evidence all around the barracks we're sitting in. French archaeologists found surface shards thousands of years old. It's actually called Konyakala, and as a customs post, well, it's not a bad position here on the river. But when the French came here in the 1980s, they only had a cursory look. They knew it was Bronze Age, but then they went back to Ai-Hanum. But what's got me thinking is that Shortagai, that Indian trading post, is also Bronze Age. So it's given me an idea. But to have a look at that, we need to get a bird's eye view. From the air, there's a clear footprint of a large structure, but it looks incomplete. The outer walls end abruptly at the riverbank. It seems most of the inner defences and the citadel have been swept away by the river. But if you fill in the blanks, this is what Konyakala originally looked like. A huge Bronze Age fortified town, over 1 kilometre wide and 3 kilometres in circumference. I believe that 2,000 years before Alexander, this was the capital of a highly advanced trading settlement beside the Oxus, and the holy city of the prophet Zoroaster. So how did Konyakala get wiped out? Well, I think it's quite clear that the Oxus has changed its course and then swept right in here and taken away more than half of the citadel. The question is, what could have caused the Oxus to flood so much that it had the power to take this away? The Oxus flows through a highly active seismic region. There have been more than 6,000 major earthquakes here in the last 1,500 years alone.
Geophysicists now believe that in 2200 BC, a series of earthquakes laid waste to the Bronze Age world. These quakes were powerful enough to burst an ice dam hundreds of kilometers upstream. Unleashing a huge torrent of water. So are we looking at the same event? Did a cataclysmic flood destroy this civilization as well? Well, the dates fit. 2200 BC, this citadel was probably here. And so if it's the same event, could well have destroyed it. In an instant, the mighty Oxus River carved itself a new course, smashing through everything in its path. It ripped Conyacala apart. By the time Alexander arrived, only a fragment of this ancient city remained. But it was still Zoroastrian holy ground. I believe Alexander conquered Conyacala because of its spiritual and strategic importance. He then renamed it Alexandria on the Oxus. And 50 years later, his successors constructed their own sacred Greek city next to the old, the place we know today as Ai Hanum, the city of Lady Moon. Well, it's terrific stuff, but unfortunately, these questions may never be answered. But what is for sure is that the Oxus really has changed its course, and in doing so, it destroyed a civilization that was here for thousands of years. At last, I've started to unravel the mystery of Alexander's lost city. Through the ages, the legend of Alexander has become larger than life. His route was grueling, and the battles he fought were hard won. It's now clear to me that Alexander had neither the time nor the resources to build 16 cities along the way. Many of the cities he conquered were already highly advanced settlements when the Greeks arrived. When Alexander took over, these places were simply renamed in his honor. He did create his own forts and would have re-engineered city defenses. But there's no sign of the great Alexandrian cities of legend, not even on the Oxus. Like the Greeks, we have crossed this hostile and unpredictable landscape. Here, Alexander carved out a foothold by capturing strategic crossroads. He left Greek garrisons and made alliances with local tribes. And in the thriving cities of ancient Bactria, he found the remnants of a civilization far more ancient than his own. Alexander laid claim to an ancient ruin. But it was the Greek colonists who came after him that built the first great Greek city in Central Asia. In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased.
This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. In 330 BC, Alexander and his army marched east into the land of Bactria on the River Oxus. They'd already endured 5 grueling years of battle. Yet despite a series of decisive victories against his Persian enemy, Alexander pushed on. Drawn by the promise of the most treasured resources in the world. For Alexander, the Oxus was a place of myth, legend, and riches.
Let's consider for a moment that Alexander and his generals knew exactly where they were. They'd come to the Oxus because they believed that this was the land where Jason and the Argonauts came. So was this the land of the Golden Fleece?
I want to follow the ancient trade routes and time-worn trails that today cross the Badlands of Afghanistan. To discover the treasured resources the Greeks found in the east and took back to the west. We're travelling along the Oxus to find the precious raw materials that made this region a highly prized crossroads in the ancient world. Navigating through this terrain successfully today is just as challenging as it was in Alexander's time. The middle delta of the Oxus is a constantly changing landscape of sandbanks, channels, and shifting islands.
Well, we've just had to take another route because the river, which is totally in flood, has come in and taken out the road. And it just shows you how much this place changes. Almost overnight, the whole roadway can get taken out, a whole village can get taken out. You just look down here, this place is just falling apart. No, he's just digging himself in too. No. If he gets it out, stops it, then we shorten the rope, okay? Okay. Hey. Hey. Oh. Yeah, very good.
Alexander faced the Pamir and Hindu Kush mountain ranges of northern Afghanistan. And just like the Greek regiments marching into the unknown 2,300 years ago, neither Jamshid or Habib, my guides, have ever travelled this route before. From now on, we have to rely only on my GPS and directions from locals. As an outsider, finding your way in Afghanistan today can be almost impossible. One of the problems is we're using maps made in the 1980s when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the place names are very different now. The map has changed even more radically since the time of Alexander. The Greeks called the Hindu Kush mountain range the Caucasus. But today, the mountain range we call the Caucasus lies 2,500 kilometers northwest in the modern Republic of Georgia. It's this confusion of ancient and modern place names that has led many academics to assume that Alexander was at times hopelessly lost. I believe that far from being lost,
Alexander knew exactly where he was. Accounts of explorers and ancient mariners stretch back into the mists of time. Alexander would have heard of the famous explorer Cyclax, whose journey in 515 BC took him from the Mediterranean to Afghanistan and beyond. But Alexander may also have been following a much earlier tale of riches in this mysterious region. The myth of Jason and the Golden Fleece is perhaps the earliest account we have of a voyage to the east in search of treasure. Jason was undoubtedly one of Alexander's heroes. Buried deep in the legend is a whisper of truth. And there's an important link to Jason's story here in Afghanistan today.
Well, let's consider for a moment that Alexander and his generals knew exactly where they were. They'd come to the Oxus because they believed that this was the land where Jason and the Argonauts came. Well, there's one thing that remains from that time, and it's the way people get gold out of the river. This is actually sheep's fleece. The gold comes down and is washed through it. And when you pick it up, the fleece carries gold. So was this the land of the Golden Fleece?
Mineral treasures like gold made the Oxus an alluring prize for any conquering army.
That's fantastic. Well, he's actually got quite a bit of gold here. It's very, very high quality. And what's incredible is this really powered this empire right through all the different civilizations.
And the ancient treasure trove is still here for those that search hard enough.
Jamshi, how much money are they going to make from this?
He says that if we work very slow, 100 hours, 50 hours. But if you work, 10,000.
So that's about $200. So it's not bad business, this, even today. $200 a day on each one of these. There's 2 operating at the moment. $400 a day is pretty good money in northern Afghanistan. What?
The Argonauts sailed from Greece to the land of the Golden Fleece. The trouble is, it's not possible to sail from the west all the way to Afghanistan today. But at the end of the last ice age, around 14,000 years ago, the climate changed. Vast ice sheets of the northern hemisphere melted, making sea levels much higher. So high that a waterway, the fabled River Oxus, connected the Caspian and the Black Seas. The Oxus stayed open for thousands of years. Jason's myth could be based upon tales of the first brave mariners of the Neolithic Age. 8,000 years ago, they travelled and traded across the seas, eastwards to the Oxus River. By the time of Alexander, the River Oxus was closed, but the idea of the Golden Fleece lived on. And once Alexander conquered ancient Bactria, the Greeks used the wealth from trade in these materials to develop their empire in the east. To this day, the rivers of Afghanistan are laden with alluvial gold. And in the hills, silver, iron ore, rubies,
and dozens of other rare minerals continue to be mined. Extracting precious ore was easy. Transporting and trading it was the hard part. Aside from the perilous journey itself, ancient traders lived with the constant threat of bandits. For Alexander, finding this source of precious raw materials may have been a prize worth fighting for. We're heading for the ancient trade routes that cross the Hindu Kush. The name of this vast range means Hindu killer, because it is one of the most unforgiving landscapes in the world. Today, these roads are used for opium smuggling. 70% of the world's supply comes from Afghanistan. Much of it is trafficked through here. This area has also recently seen Taliban activity. And even though I prefer to travel unarmed, Jamshid insists on borrowing a gun for this leg of the journey. We reached the village of Cha'ab, and while Jamshid asks for directions to the road south, I head up to the remains of a Bactrian fort. For Alexander's soldiers, left here to garrison this position, it must have been a lonely and forbidding place.
Well, we're now heading into the mountains. We're about 40 kilometres from the Oxus, and these were fortresses, probably to secure trade or even a farming area. But we know this is a really ancient site because the French were here in the 70s, and they actually had a cursory look around and found some pottery. But from this point, further south, no archaeologist has had a look. So for the next 4 or 5 days, we're going into uncharted territory.
Like us, Alexander's regiments pushed on. From the Oxus River lowlands, we've been travelling north. The road we are following may not seem so important today, but we're only 300 kilometres from the fertile plains of the Indus Valley in India. This is an ancient highway. For over 2,000 years before Alexander arrived, it was an important link between the Bactrian and Indus civilizations, two of the oldest and most advanced in world history. And it was only one of a huge network of trade routes. After Alexander's conquest, these communication links became the arteries of the greatest of all Greek empires. Nomadic people like the Kuchi have been transporting and trading goods and livestock along these same roads for millennia. Today, the passes into India are closed to the Kuchi, and their nomadic cycle now lies only within the borders of Afghanistan. Life here today is more dangerous than ever. The Kuchi population has been decimated by landmines. They were planted over 30 years ago, during the war between Soviet invaders and the Afghan Mujahideen resistance. We've arranged to stop for the night at a Halo Trust landmine clearance camp. It's a UK charity that's systematically removing the millions of landmines in Afghanistan. The commander and his team have allowed me to watch them work.
So we have to wear our helmets from here.
Okay.
We're just signing and writing our blood group in case something does go wrong. They know what to pump into us. Thank you.
Painted rocks guide us in. During the Soviet occupation, this was an army base. They planted landmines all around, the most deadly kind of defense mechanism.
And this is what they're looking for. This is the outer casing of an anti-personnel mine, and it's rubber, so it's very, very hard to detect. The other parts are ceramic. The only metal is actually a spring and a firing pin.
To date, landmines have killed 76 local people. And 4 of the Halo Trust team have died just in the last few months. Every time the metal detector gives a signal, it's a tense moment.
This is obviously a really delicate exercise, and I just can't believe how brave these guys are to do this every day. 5 in the morning till 12 in the afternoon, and all they do is dig up mines so people can come and plant their crops and actually have a normal life. It must be one of the most dangerous jobs in the world.
To keep these ancient trade routes open, the team risk their lives every minute, and they're paid just $120 a month.
And this is the frustrating part. Most of the time it's just a bullet, an empty casing. But you can never tell. Either it's going to be a landmine or a jump-up booby-trap mine. So it's a very painstaking, very slow job. You can imagine that every square metre of this whole field and all around this old Soviet base has to be cleared inch by inch.
The team have now found a mine. They clear the area, prepare an explosive, and pack it in around the mine to destroy it safely. For me, the work of the Halo Trust is a sobering reminder of how perilous it can be exploring the past here in Afghanistan. Landmines are one hidden killer Alexander didn't have to look out for. But his crossing was far from easy. Ambushes and rock slides made every pass a potentially fatal trap. Now I want to find one of the most important treasures of the Oxus, a rare, semi-precious stone traded from here as far afield as ancient Egypt. But first, we have to cross what many call the Afghan Badlands, a realm so hostile that it was never tamed by Alexander.
Even the Afghan government has very little control here. It's the stomping ground of the Islamic force, the Mujahideen. Not somewhere you want to get lost. And we need directions.
Didn't know about that.
Think this was going to happen?
Jamshed.
Is this the Kishim Road?
Yes, this is
So we go
Kishim
back
Road.
that way. Where is the side of the bridge?
In here, down.
Ah! Kujos! We're called over to the police outpost. Well, it looks like we're just being checked out because they weren't expecting anybody, particularly anybody like me, turning up right in the middle of nowhere. I've been summoned.
Yeah, he's a religious leader.
This can be a bit of a tricky area because there's still a lot of Mujahideen leaders here, what they call Mujahid leaders, but basically the government doesn't have a lot of control here. And this gentleman is actually a policeman, and so he's one of the only guys that is good to meet here, and he didn't know who we were, and it's a bit of a tricky area. So everybody's happy now. We'll see if we can find out something. We get directions to the ancient route through the mountainous heart of Afghanistan. Across the Kocha, a tributary of the Oxus, we head north towards Faizabad, the mountain capital of Badakhshan province. This is the only centre of any size for hundreds of kilometres. Faizabad's a raw frontier town. Today, the ancient trade routes carry opium to Tajikistan and Taliban fighters to the north. We need to stock up on supplies, and the produce in Faizabad market is a pleasant surprise. This is like an Aladdin's cave, isn't it? All the things you really, really need when you're a Westerner in Afghanistan. But it's not just food I'm after. There's one very special commodity that I want to find. A raw material that was exported all over the ancient world. Prized in the highest echelons by the Egyptian pharaohs. Well, this stuff is like gold up here. It's called lapis lazuli, and Badakhshan is absolutely famous for it. Now, if you remember the mask of Tutankhamun, with those wonderful gold stripes and then blue, well, this is this stuff. It's been coming out of this part of the world for about 7,000 years, and there's little shops all over the place making jewelry. But further south from here, about a day's journey, are the actual mines where they mine the stuff for Tutankhamun's mask, and that's where we're going to head. Thank you. Tutankhamun is the most famous Egyptian king of all time. When he died 3,300 years ago, his mummy was adorned with an extravagant golden death mask. It's one of the most iconic symbols of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship in existence today. The long strips of blue stone are made of lapis, hand-cut and transported from the mines of ancient Bactria. Just like the conquering Greeks, I'm looking for the source of this treasure. And there's one place, high in the mountains, so rich in lapis, it's still mined today. Well, this is not the best place for this to happen. This area isn't that secure. So it's about the worst place we actually want to be stopped and changing a puncher for 20 minutes. Doesn't feel so good.
The road we're on has to be one of the most isolated in the world.
قریبه
بسیار نیم ساعت نمونده.
نیم ساعت پای پیاده.
What did he say?
He said that it's half hour.
Half hour. So very close.
Yeah, very close.
We climb higher and higher to the age-old mining settlement of Sarsang and move our gear into the police compound. Every day, goods and tools are either hauled in here or improvised on the spot. Other than expensive generators, there's no power. Outsiders here are rare. Foreign faces make people decidedly uneasy. The local commander has enough trouble keeping control of this remote outpost without having to look out for uninvited travellers. But we're guests, and as guests, we automatically fall under our host's protection. Without fuss, a meal appears, and Jamshid and Habib fill the commander in on news from the outside world. Embracing this culture of hospitality enables us to penetrate so deeply into these remote corners of Afghanistan unarmed. The miners' settlement is spread out over what looks very much like an avalanche zone. Shelters built entirely out of local rock shield the miners from the elements, winter and summer. Lapis has been mined here for thousands of years, and it is still valuable today. It's these men's livelihood. In these remote highlands, there's no government controls on lapis. Most of it is packed on mules all the way to the stonecutters of Pakistan and India. Way above the valley are the mines. Like seams of gold, the veins of lapis run deep into the mountainsides. I walk with the light-headed effort of altitude and the promise of exploring the oldest continuously worked mine anywhere on Earth. Doing this every day, hauling heavy mining equipment, is a punishing life.
Well, we're at about 3,000 meters here, and it's cool inside the mine. There's a breeze coming out of here. It's much, much cooler than the 35 degrees outside. But what's incredible is this mine has been worked continuously for between 6,000 and 7,000 years, and this whole mountain is catacombed with little tunnels. And from here, the lapis has been taken right across the world, even to ancient Egypt. As we pick our way along the tunnels, it's like walking through time. This is mine number 1, the oldest of all. Over thousands of years, generations of miners cut this tunnel deeper and deeper into the rock face. Somewhere here in the darkness, there's a point where around 1325 BC, an exceptionally rich blue vein was found and extracted.
Well, this is what they're looking for. This is a whole scene through here. I don't really know the quality because obviously I'm not a gem expert, but you can see if I put some water on it, the blue really starts to come out. And it's just marvelous that nature makes this color. You know, nowhere else do you see a blue like that. Marvelous.
In the hands of an Egyptian royal jeweler, rocks of lapis were transformed, cut, polished and bound in gold to make the dazzling death mask of King Tutankhamun. Sealed in his solid gold tomb to protect his journey to the afterlife. The riches of the Oxus tell the story of civilization's earliest beginnings. They reveal that long before Alexander, our world was far more connected than I'd ever realized. Luxury goods were loaded onto caravans and trading boats and transported. 300 kilometers to Harappa in the Indus Valley, 2,500 kilometers to Babylon in Mesopotamia, 3,800 kilometers to Thebes in ancient Egypt, and over 4,000 kilometers to Athens in Greece. Today, these miners labor to meet world demand for this alluring blue stone.
Salam. How are you? Oh my God.
این ماشین کمپیروسونه این تو جوازه میکنه باز دینامو پر میشه باز پتاقی و پلته
Says that we put dynamite here first to make a hole, and they put dynamite inside and blast it, and then they clean it till they find the vein. You see if the vein is going here. Yes. So that's the following.
How long has he worked in the mine here?
من چقدر وقت شده اینجا کار میکنی؟
دیجو یک سال.
1 year.
1 year. So it's very dusty work they're doing. And the problem is, you never know where these veins go. It's like gold. And sometimes they get right on one like this, and then they can follow it. But a lot of the time they lose it, and they spend weeks and weeks trying to find them again. So sometimes work doesn't pay very well. Thank you.
These are terrible conditions. In Sarsang, lung disease is just a matter of time. But it's death by dynamite and rock falls that are all too often the common killers. This is one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. An earthquake could hit at any time. After each long shift, every miner lugs his treasure down the mountain, where middlemen and traders bid for the raw stone. Lapis is formed of 3 different minerals: lazurite, calcite and pyrite. And its quality varies depending on its colour and smoothness of texture.
So what's that?
So what we're looking for is really, really deep blue. So these are really nice pieces, which are probably worth taking. See, this one would be lovely to make a pendant or a heart, and that one's like a lovely sort of amulet. But all of these together, how much?
The work of these 21st century Afghans is a living link back to the time of Alexander.
Very good. Thank you very much.
For the ancient Greeks, conquest and occupation began by controlling the mountain passes and the flow of trade. Alexander was undefeated in battle. And now he set his sights on a land with even more mineral wealth than Bactria. For the Greeks, India was the eastern edge of their known world. It was a mysterious and exotic source of untold riches: gold, textiles, and precious minerals. And the mountain passes into India have hardly changed since Alexander passed through here almost 2,300 years ago. We've driven over 600 kilometers from the Oxus River Valley across some of the most rugged terrain in the world. The Wakhan Corridor is a 330-kilometre strip of land bordered by Tajikistan to the north and Pakistan to the south. We're following an ancient highway that leads to India. The Pamir mountain valleys are some of the highest on Earth. That's why English explorers named it the roof of the world. Ancient caravans would trek along these grueling crossroads between the east and west.
Trouble with travelling on these rivers is you've got to do it at the right time. Otherwise, if there's too much water, you just can't get through. The next 4 or 5 k's, we've just got to go straight up the riverbed.
Before invading India, Alexander had to secure his army's supply line. But he was constantly harried by local tribes, who would ambush his army before retreating to seemingly impenetrable mountain fortresses. I want to find out what it was like for Greek troops to attack one of these natural bastions. And there are no roads where we're heading. We cross the Oxus, where the Wakhan meets the Boragil Pass into Pakistan and India beyond. Alexander and his army battled their way through these ranges for 6 long months in the dead of winter. He is believed to have crossed from Afghanistan into India south of here. But I'm convinced over the months, Alexander would have split his army into different units to crush resistance along the strategic passes of this mountain corridor. Greek records tell us Alexander laid siege to one great fortified crag here in the Pamir. But dozens more must have gone unreported. And over 100 years ago, in 1904, an intrepid archaeologist explorer came here on Alexander's trail. His name was Aurel Stein.
Sophie, where do you think? Where to cross?
In spite of Stein's efforts, to date, the evidence of these remote citadels from Alexander's time is scant. But I believe this place can shed a great deal of light on Alexander's mountain battles. Built over 1,300 years ago by the Tibetans, this ruined fort is a monument to a lost chapter in history. The site of one of the most ruthless sieges ever to take place in these mountains. It's known as Cancia Fort, and it was just like the defences Alexander and his men would have come up against. Its story gives us an idea of the tactics that earned Alexander a reputation as the greatest besieger of all time. In 747 AD, the Tibetans ruled this valley. They built the fortress to resist the invading armies of China. Between 7 and 9 in the morning, 3 columns of Chinese cavalry and infantry mustered into a 10,000-strong force in the valley below. The Chinese commander, Xian Qi, moved quickly to cut off all approaches to the stronghold, crushing the defences at river level in a few hours. Then they scaled these steep slopes to the isolated citadel. High in their rock fortress, the Tibetans seemed safe, but in fact, they were hopelessly trapped.
Well, that is one hell of a climb. This citadel stands at about 4,200 metres, and our guides have just told me that we're the first Westerners that they know who've actually made it up here. It's an incredible place. Incredible to build, but I think incredible to defend. And if you can imagine back there in August 747, the Tibetans up here, looking across the valley there at 10,000 Chinese assembling, and then them coming steadily across the river. It would have been a terrifying sight. And knowing that they couldn't get out of here, it would have been one of the most frightening experiences. And it ended in absolute disaster.
The Chinese experience here at Cancia gives us an insight into what the sieges of the Greeks would have been like. Their strategy just as devastating. Commander Xian Qi now pushed home the final assault.
And he did it with skill. After routing the defences down at river level, he actually massacred 6,000 of the Tibetans. And then he outflanked them. He came up these gullies, and then his men poured through that saddle. There was only about 1,000 Tibetans left here to guard the citadel, and they were overwhelmed. Only about 2,000 or 3,000 actually made it out, and they fled up the Baragul Pass into what is today Pakistan. It is one of the great defeats of military history, right here on the roof of the world.
1,000 years before the Chinese, it would have been exactly the same for Alexander's troops. Facing what must at times have seemed an impossible challenge, they conquered this hostile borderland. Now the road to India lay open. Ancient legends had told of the riches of the East, and Alexander turned myth into reality. 2,300 years ago, Alexander came to ancient Bactria to conquer his enemy and discovered a realm that overflowed with mineral wealth. His empire would profit from the ancient world's most sought-after currency, precious materials like gold and lapis. They would control ancient trade and communication links all the way from Greek city-states in the west to India in the east. Alexander's success in far-flung lands transformed the Greek Empire and changed our world forever.